got it up here.
draw stuff because some things are happening to the other side of charge that are enticing.
Yeah, they get their users money and they pretty much hand it out in Target gift cards.
Right,
Gina, I'm sorry. They get their users money. They hand it out in Target gift cards. Right. All right, so come on. Okay.
Trying to keep make reservations for anyone who really wants to see.
It's an idea. It's a great idea.
That now?
Not too long. Great description. Everyone ready? Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our April 21st, 2021 board meeting. Would everyone please stand to pledge our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can we have roll call?
Is this on? Okay. Mr. Acker,
Here.
Mr. Azar,
Here.
Dr. Cadman.
Here.
Mr. Fleming.
Here.
Mr. Medensky,
Here.
Mrs. Pusateri.
Here.
Mr. Robeson,
Here.
Mrs. Tierney,
Here,
Mrs. Brashalski,
Here.
all present.
And Dr. Mann, can we have our superintendent's report?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Brashalski. I am going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So thank you, Mrs. Brashalski. Tonight I have a number of topics to review. The first topic is YMCA. I just want to let the board know that there is the possibility of constructing a new YMCA in our region. Information from the community is being gathered by the Institute for Public Policy and Economic Development. And our thought is that we will assist in helping get the word out to our community for our members to connect with the Institute to try to offer their thoughts, and all are encouraged to respond and have your voices heard about this potential project. I also want to alert the board to a possibility of some of our bonds have come due. And we have about $3.3 million bond at 2.1% interest. We have the ability at this time, if the board would like to move forward, to defease the bond. Refunding at this point is probably not as good an idea if we wanted to proceed. Defeasement of the bond would generate operational revenues of about $700,000. We have more than adequate reserves. In anytime we have a use of reserve for non-recurring expense, it is highly appropriate. If we were to have this operational dollars reflected in next year's budget, prompt action is required, but certainly that's a good topic for the board. And this will come up later in a conversation we have about planning for next year. So we'll have an opportunity to look at this in the context of planning for the fall. And that leads us into that very next topic, planning for the fall, right? So some of the things that we really think we ought to be doing, high priority issues, is that, and we've discussed this before, we have lost teachers reading and instructional support in elementary. Those teachers have been called to go into classrooms that in the past they would do reading support, instructional support. We had one of our teachers do Common Connect, our computer science program. Because of the pandemic, all of them were asked to put aside their normal duties of supporting kids who are at risk and go in to just actually teach classrooms. And now more than ever, we need those people to be back supporting kids in their reading, and because our needs are very high at this point. Also, to provide additional administrative and curricular support of principal in the elementary. We have a very strong need at the high school for one additional elective teacher. And as the board knows, one of the things we're obligated to do is to provide compensatory services to students, particularly in special education, but also in regular ed. The board is aware we have some programs going after school right now to try to address those. So those are very high priority needs. And with the bond defeasement, our thought perhaps would be to match up some of these expenses with the revenue that would be freed up from an operational point of view from a bond defeasance. But again, that's just part of the discussion as to how we might target the utilization of those operational expenses. So here's how our enrollments look right now and how they have changed over the course of the year. And this is kind of it's a busy chart, but I think we can maybe get some meaning from it. In the fall, we started all virtual, right? And then in early October, we moved into hybrid. And so during that time, we had in elementary, 164 students in virtual, 1,078 in hybrid, middle, and high school. You could see the enrollments. Right, then on March 8th, it was a big day for us. We returned full-time in person, 5 days per week. And you could see changes in those numbers, right? From virtual to in-person, again, in-person 5 days per week. And then recently, on April 5th, we had another opportunity for students to change their designation. And currently we have 185 students in elementary virtual versus 1,076 in person.
Dr. Wynn, did
Yes.
we gain students in elementary? Is that, or did they leave hybrid or
Yeah.
leave charters or something and
If,
come back?
right, there's different reasons, but if you add the two numbers, virtual and hybrid,
They don't,
they're not going to match
Right.
because enrollments change through the course of the year.
right.
Right.
That's a pretty big difference
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
April and fall.
Right, we've had people come back, we have some people come back for charters, we had other people move into the district, so,
Okay.
and it goes up and down. It
Okay.
really does, it goes up and down over the course of the year, and over the course of time, it goes up and down. In the middle school, we have 242, 844, and at the high school, 314, 739. Right, now,
Wait, what? That doesn't make sense, middle school.
The
So
mid-
essentially, you have almost the same in between hybrid and in-person, but virtual is 242 and then 621.
I'm sorry,
400 student difference?
well, look, like, for instance, we start out, all right, so look.
Something.
1,456 students.
Right,
And now-
oh, so there's an error in the number here.
Yeah.
Dr. Vitale, could you, let me correct this number. You have, Dr. Vitale gave me this, not gave me
Okay.
this, but, so let me correct those.
Okay.
So then going to the next sheet, see, here's in person, and so virtual, these numbers, I think the in-person number is probably wrong here.
The virtual number.
Right, the virtual, right, so
Probably
well,
wrong.
295, 620, 290, no, see, with 620, 295,
Yeah, but then the
242.
in-persons didn't go up by the same.
yeah, so let's look at the numbers. But regardless, we have, the issue will be, right, we have large numbers of students who are virtual. And I'm very sorry, these numbers are not adding up, right? So the issue, this is the problem we face for the fall, right? And that we will have large numbers of students who are virtual. Now, at elementary, we've been able to handle it in that we have dedicated virtual teachers who are teaching virtual students. It kind of works, right? But in the middle school and the high school, currently we have teachers who are teaching both at the same time, and that's been problematic, right? So as we look for the fall, for our virtual students, there are three options that we would look at, right? The first is the current model, where our teachers instruct students at home and in person simultaneously, right? The second would be an Abington Heights School District option, where through a combination of modified scheduling and increasing staffing, students receive all virtual schedule of Abington Heights teachers. Right? And then finally, pending discussions with our partners, a third-party vendor is contracted to provide services to virtual students. We would call that the Common Academy, Abington Heights, whatever the name would be. But this would be a third-party vendor that will be providing the services to the students who are at home.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, so I'm recalling past presentations where there were surveys sent out and the student population that wanted to come back all in was in the high 80s and 90 percentile.
Correct.
So were the surveys incorrect? Did that not pan out?
No, and again, let's, the key. Okay, all right. So middle school is 220.
Oh, the fall was incorrect. Okay.
Oh, all right,
That makes sense.
okay,
So
Yeah,
that
'cause-
stayed pretty consistent.
right.
They didn't, people who were virtual kind of remained virtual.
Let me see if I could.
That's what that-
Let me refresh that so we can look at it. That's correct.
But to Jean's point, if they stayed pretty consistent, There was a huge percentage.
So here we
of
are.
kids that came
That's
back.
right. I copied the number. I'm sorry.
Okay,
So you can see 228, 295, 242. Right?
so the virtual students stayed pretty consistent the whole year.
Well, low
A
up
little
and then
bump
back
and
down.
mark. When they were a little nervous
Right.
about the all back, but then
Right.
some
Right.
people got comfortable.
Right, I think that's right. So the key numbers here, this is our problem. This is our problem that we're looking at right here. So my apologies on the earlier numbers. That was totally my fault.
And then I just had a quick second
yes.
question.
Yes,
So in terms of their options, you had a middle option about continuing teaching both in and out. I thought there was a point at which that was no longer an option. So we're not going back to that. I don't,
Well-
think. We're
well,
not going
no,
back
but-
to offering that as an
right.
option, are we?
And so now, if I could just, and that's a very good question, Scott. The 185, the elementary, we're pretty well set, right? Now, the 242 and the 314, that's what we're talking about now, next on this slide, right? So we're looking at middle school and high school, grades 5 through 12, right? Now, as options, right, as options for us, right, we could use our current model. Now, we would continue to say, look, if you're virtual, you can't be half and half, right? But if you are virtual, we still need to teach you. And you will be connected to the classroom where the teacher is teaching those students in the classroom, right? So the first option would be our current model, right? Where students on virtual would be connected to the classroom with the teacher who's also teaching students who are in front of him or her. The second option would be to say, all right, some combination of I'm a high school science biology teacher. I teach 6 classes. One of my classes will be virtual, all virtual during the day, and the rest of them will be in person. Or I'm a all virtual English teacher and all my classes are virtual during the day. So some combination of that, right, would be the second option. And then the third option would be to say, we find a third party, if again, discussions are required, but we would find a third party vendor who we would assign all our virtual students to, and they would have certified teachers and provide services and have an online platform that would provide, the educational instruction and services for that group of students who are all virtual.
And based on our curriculum and our direction, they would design it, or we have to buy what they offer?
We would have to buy what they offer, right?
Okay.
They have a platform that they use. They have teachers who are trained in that platform, and they service students from multiple districts. And so it would really be a cyber school run by this third-party vendor. And we've been interviewing some of these vendors.
And would the other option of family using a cyber charter school with us paying the tuition also be an option for them?
Well, it wouldn't be one we'd list,
But-
because that would be many multiples in cost
But
per
we could
student.
we could still incur that cost as well.
We could,
Well, yeah.
at all times,
Always.
we are subject to that
So
cost.
we couldn't say this is your option for all virtual.
I think there's been legislation that suggests, and I think that would be fair, but that is not the way the law is written right now.
Dr. Mann,
Yes.
so option 1 is basically the virtual students are seeing the classroom as it happens. Option 2 and 3 are totally virtual.
Correct.
In option 2, where we have our own online program, if you will, would we have the opportunity to offer that to students from other districts if they wanted to pay us to do that?
It would be something that we would certainly consider. We've been in discussions with other districts. Again, this is just the broad brush of strategy. We've been in discussions with other districts to say, look, can we combine? And you help us with this and we help you with that, to try to get the best possible opportunity. So yes, Mr. Acker, those things are in discussion, but it's a complex discussion that involves multiple parties. But in short answer, yes, that's something we would definitely want to consider. Okay, so those are the options. Now let's take a look at them, right? So if the numbers are correct, and I think it's around 550, right? So we have 550 students in grades 5 through 12 who at this point, and that may change in the fall, right? There's uncertainty. We'll be the first to admit it, right? But 550 students in grades 5 through 12. The approximate cost of this program is about $2,800 per student. And multiplying that through, it comes to about a cost of $1.5 million. And we'll post this online so people can have access to it. We after carefully reviewing numbers of these vendors, they offer a credible option, but the quality would be lower than anything that we would drive ourselves. And I say that with complete confidence, right? And that's not to say we're great or they're bad. It's just true. We're better. And now the costs recur only as long as the program exists, right? So if at some point we're saying we're no longer providing this option, then we're no longer paying for that option, right? And the program is scalable in that as students go up and students go down, largely, and there's some fixed cost issues that come up, but largely we can adjust the program and cost based upon the number of students who are enrolled.
But this assumes that the current situation continues through the fall.
Correct.
Well, is that a good assumption?
I don't know.
I mean,
don't know.
does it require another survey or, I
Well-
mean, I would encourage people to come back. I mean,
Yes.
people are getting, I mean, it's just the way
Yep.
the country is moving.
Yeah. Mr. Fleming, here, we will later this week be sending out another survey asking students if they would like to come back in early May, right? And our concern is, right, that the number, we don't know how much we're going to learn from that, because right now we have a bunch of kids in quarantine. There's seniors who may or may not be interested. Like there's uncertainty swirling right now. And so I'm surprised that we have as many students home as we do right now. I would have thought far less, right? And could that be 100 students in the fall? Yes. Could it be 600 students in the fall? I don't know. I don't know. That's our problem. I wish we had better data.
Doesn't it relate a little bit to the quality of the online education? If the online education is good, those numbers will stay high. If it's low and they want to do online, they'll probably just go to a cyber charter.
I do think the Comet Academy would be competitive in quality with cyber charters. So I think we would be looking apples to apples there. So I don't think it could be claimed that there'd be higher quality going to the cyber charter than our own cyber program.
So do you think we'll get students out of the cyber charter and into the Common Academy?
We wrote to, we would try, right? And part of the effort we would undertake would be to contact the people in the cyber charter and say, here's a better cyber charter. And it's Abington Heights Cyber Charter. And we would be truthful about what it actually is, right? But it would be brand, you get our diploma, you would get our, we would give credits for the thing. So we would endeavor to do that. Just as we endeavored to reach out to all of our cyber parents when we came back 5 days a week and said, you know, please come back, because if you were in cyber because you needed something other and you were waiting for open, we're open now, please come. And we were moderately successful in grabbing some students to come back. But yes, we would have a conscientious marketing effort if we were to go with the Comet Cyber, whatever the name would be, to try to get people to move over.
Dr. May, what advantages can we offer to the Comet Cyber?
Mhm.
Like, for instance, participation in specials.
Correct.
You know, after school program.
Yes.
Other, I know that cyber students can still participate in athletics,
Mhm.
but do they participate in every special, every
Right.
venue? Do you know what I mean? That we
Yes,
have to offer. so
And
that we-
part of our effort was to make clear, I will also tell you, right, you'll see in the budget, I've substantially increased the dollars we spend in field trips next year. Right? Because they're great, they're educational, but I think we could distinguish ourselves from some of our online competitors. To put it, they really are not competitors because they cannot do what we do, but their revenue problems. And so that we could get out and say, look, we're going here and we're going there and we're doing things. So like that would be one example. And anyone who was in our Common Academy who wanted to participate in the field trips could do so, right? So you'll see that budget number increase like a way bit a month, but thoughtfully, right? And our principals will be working on some good activities. So yes, in short answer, Mr. Brashowski, we want to distinguish ourselves in every possible way. And if we should go with the Common Academy route, we would be very clear. They are our students, not somebody else's, as in the cyber charters. And they would get our credits and our diploma and
how about access to our counselors?
Mhm.
You know,
Yes.
I think,
Yes.
all of
Yep.
that, and with the hope that they will come back full time
yes. And we
when they're ready. or-
part of this discussion is planning the marketing as you're describing. So we have a marketing plan that we have been discussing, Dr. Vitale, with some of these vendors to how to reach out to people to accomplish exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
Superintendent Mann, so I just had a couple of questions.
Yes.
One is, the scalability is, I think, is huge because to Mr. Fleming's point, I think the idea is that everybody's back in the fall. So that number is going to change regardless, hopefully to go lower. And if it's scalable, we can unplug if it gets to a point where it's appropriate, or not even plug in, right? But the other thing is the lower quality than the Abington Heights School District driven option. I mean, this is all for virtual. So, you know, this company, these third-party companies, this is what they do. They deliver in that modality. It's not, I don't want to compare it to in-person classroom because it's all online, right? Comet Academy is all online. It's all virtual. So I don't know if the quality is necessarily lower in terms of that's their core competency. They're in business to drive and deliver online education. And as we all know, it's not a camera looking at a teacher. There's tools, there's techniques. So I don't know. I have a slight issue with the lower quality. Not to say that I'm sure Abington Heights is better than Comet Academy, but for online, I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
Right.
And the scalability is, I think, huge in this option because I think our mentality should be, at least mine is, we're all back in the fall. We're all back in the fall. And this is a good option to plug in and out when need be.
Right.
And let me maybe expand on why I come to the view that it is not as good of an option, right? Because it's a very fair question to ask, right? Because they do this all the time, right? So if I'm taking English from, and I don't want to talk it down, right? Because this may be something we're doing, but I'll just in the sense of contrast, right? If I take English on the Comet Academy, I will have live sessions twice per week with my teacher. On the other days during my period, right? And I actually don't have a period, I have assignments, right? I will engage in those online assignments. And if I hit a snag, I hit a customer service button that says, I need help. And then that goes into a queue of a number of English teachers, not necessarily my own, who then would at a designated time, perhaps not immediately, and perhaps within a day, all right, would be able to get back to me to work on something that 2 hours ago was a problem of mine, or 1 day ago was a problem of mine. And so I contrast that with our own English teacher, who would have a specific period every single day, where there would be engagement every single day, eye to eye, screen on, opportunities to interact, Google platform assignment, which would be, perhaps they have a slicker platform than we do, right? But the ability for someone to fall to the side and become disengaged in the Common Academy is orders of magnitude higher than it would be for Abington Heights, because they have a very good way to manage lots of students. And we have a very good way to engage the students that we have. And so I'm very confident that their methodology, while perhaps slicker, right, and more elegant in approach, is far inferior to the active engagement that we would offer to our students.
But it's the same quality that you probably would get within any cyber charter.
100%, I think we would do better.
So that distinction has to be made
Exactly,
as well,
yes.
that if we were to go with this program, it would
Right.
still be an improvement over the cyber charter option.
That would be
That's
100%
money
true,
from our-
100% true, yes. So on those, we would do better, but they can't touch us. With respect, I respect your view, but having viewed this, their methodology is to manage large numbers. Ours is to engage kids.
I think whatever virtual option we have, whether it's Common Academy or our own
Right.
virtual, very definitely, we should aggressively approach the cyber charter students, get them back,
Yes,
because you can offer so many more enrichment opportunities for them, and in addition, giving them a better education.
yes, I agree. Like nine.
$11 million for a regular, or $11,000 for a regular ed student, 21,000 for special ed, and we're paying $2 million this year in total charter expenses.
So even if we got a third of those students over here, benefit. So
Right.
do we have a feel that of those cyber students, would they go to Common Academy? Is that something?
The cyber charters are doing extraordinarily. They're making extraordinary efforts to retain their kids. And they have massive amounts of money
And we're given
to do it.
21.
And we're given more of it through the thing. So while we will do everything, and we are better, okay? Being better and being able to market better are two different things. And they have lots of bells and whistles. Like, for instance, we are not handing out computer equipment and all that to people who are in. I mean, we will, like, we'll have Chromebooks and we'll make sure everything is covered. But it pales into comparison to the fancy stuff that people are getting. And so, I mean, it becomes, and they have some money where, as I understand, they've been helping out with, Target gift cards for kids with some of their federal money to deal with, mitigation at home and that kind of thing. So we will do it. We'll aggressively do it. We've tried and we've had minor success, but I don't know it would be realistic for us to bank on, large numbers of students transitioning because they make an effort to hang on to their kids.
I think that as we are looking at the virtual and the numbers that are a little higher than we anticipated, I think maybe we need to look at the 5-day back in the classroom. I'm hearing from parents from high school, elementary, and middle school. There's a lack of fear. There's fear. There's still fear. There's a lot of quarantine questions. There's a lot of breakdown in the students' learning. And I'm saying, I know that administration, everyone's doing everything possible, but I think that there is high numbers of virtual because families are still concerned about the safety in the buildings and seeing so many kids, out for 2 weeks and then in, and then getting phone calls and then being told you can't return. So are there plans in place for the 5 days back in the fall to do a little bit more, maybe cleaning periodically? Any thoughts of moving classrooms again and giving more space? Because I think that like you just said, you're going to offer the kids to come back again, but now it's not a great time because there's quarantining. I think it's a fear that we're not safe enough.
And I actually, Mrs. Attorney, I have about 12 slides on that very topic.
Great.
A little bit later.
Great.
Not that I'm going to answer it exactly maybe, but I have some thoughts that might address that issue.
And I think we have to think about what is going on at school versus what's going on in the community. Because it doesn't necessarily, that fear may not necessarily be coming from the school, maybe because of what's occurring in the community.
Right.
Dr. Mann, I just want to make a couple points. So the third option that you talk about being inferior, the Common Academy, I don't think that it's an apples to apples comparison, right? So I don't think that we should be trying to make that, if that's going to be an option, that's apples to apples to the cybers. And we're going to be better than the cybers if we provide that option. The option that is relevant to me is the comparison of our in-person option versus another in-person option. Like, I don't think that it's fair to compare our in-person option. Well, Common Academy is not as good. The parents that long-term are going to take advantage of that option are families that want cyber, that they don't want in person.
Right.
So if we're better than cyber with that Common Academy, I think that that's a good thing to offer. And the concern that I have about that middle option is that you're permanently increasing costs.
Right, and let me get to the middle
Significantly.
option, because that's it, right? So if we decide this, then that's it, the decision's over, but it is a decision. Because we could do our own cyber academy, meaning with our own people, right? And actually, that's my next, I could actually look at this, the next, kind of the pluses and minuses, right? So again, we're starting with the same number of students. Now, to Mr. Fleming's point, whether that's 550 or 600 or 400 or 200 or who knows what, right? That's a problem. Okay, it is a problem. We look at a potentially 9 to 10 new professional staff members, right? In 5 through 12. That's in addition to the ones we spoke about in the beginning, the high priority, right? Those are just things we need. This is additional to kind of operate this option, right? The total cost, thinking about a new teacher as $100,000, right? It comes into about $1 million. And in fairness, we do have to say, this is a better educational option than the Common. It is, right? It is, however, a recurring and escalating expense in that people generally, people cost money, but then they cost more each subsequent year, right? Now there's attritional savings at the other end, but it's a recurring and escalating cost over time. And to a degree, it is scalable, but it's scalable over a longer period of time. I say that because, every year, and you'll see tonight, we have teachers who are retiring. And for many, many years, we here have eliminated positions by attrition. And we've brought down our numbers of staffing. And it's, we've seen every graph, we've seen it 1,000 times, how we've limited our staff, right? Now, with Common Academy, it goes away immediately, right? With the 9 or 10 teachers here, it would have to work its way down over time, but it still could be scalable, but not as quickly. All right, and far less predictably than with the Common Academy.
The total
Right.
cost of 1 million is not the delta though, correct? Because if you have the Common Academy, you're paying 2,800 a student.
Right.
So what's the delta?
Well, I think that, well, what I'm saying here is that
Based
I
on-
don't think we would do all, like, I'm thinking it would be either or. Like, I don't think we would do Common Academy and this
No, I
option.
know, but I'm saying if this is an either or and you want to compare
Right.
this to the Common Academy,
Sure.
if this costs $1 million.
The other
or
one's $1.5
1.5 million.
So it's $500,000 less.
500,000 less. So that's really not,
Take $1 million and divide by 550, it's $1,800.
well, I mean,
Right.
it's a
But
$1.5 million.
between the two.
Between the two, it's a $500,000 difference.
At 550, right? Now that changes, right? If we get more kids,
Right.
our model becomes less expensive.
But do you think this model would be more marketable to both our cyber students, more attractive, that now you're not just getting a canned Common Connect, you're getting our teachers.
So I would just postulate that I know 550 is the current number.
Right.
I can't imagine that it's going to be 550, especially if you offer Common Academy instead of what we're offering now, where all the parents in this community can come as close as they can to Abington Heights. They have the same teachers. They're not going to have that. Like the option is definitely inferior to what they have now. And I
Right,
got to
but
think that
thi-
that's going to
but
drive the
option
numbers
where
down.
We hire our teachers into our program
Is really a
is,
good one.
is a good one. And I think we have a better odds of attracting the students that are currently enrolled in the cyber option to this one more so than just.
Correct. I agree with that.
And
Yes,
on the
absolutely.
other side, I would have to say, we have less of a chance of losing them because the cyber charters are going to keep marketing
Right.
Mhm.
away.
Yep.
And while from an educational point of view, we're every bit as good or better, the bells and whistles do not exist in Common Connection that in Common Academy that exist in some of the cyber.
So I agree with all that. I would just say that as you run the numbers, like
Right.
you're running all the numbers, I would look at, even if we don't get 550, like if we
Right.
get 200 or 150,
Right.
and that grows over time, it could still be worthwhile. Like 550, it's a no brainer that which one you do, I think. Why would you do Common Academy if there's going to be 500 or 700 kids that are not
Fair
in,
enough.
but even if that number is really low,
Right.
you guys have been talking about long before I was here, having an Abington Heights option. And I think that,
Well,
that,
right,
that has a
I'm
lot of
also
potential.
looking at accepting out of district students to our option, to this option as well, if we have the capacity. There's obviously our students would get first, but if there was room for 30 or 40 students, you let other districts send their students to
Sure.
our option, which is far better
The,
than.
the only advantage of as far as I see it, of the Common Academy is exactly what Bill talked about, which is the fact that your costs are in direct relation to the number of students you have.
That's right.
More
Right.
students.
That's
know,
right.
But I'm looking
and
at
that's the only
quality.
advantage,
I'm looking at
really.
quality, and I think there's a value to that.
I
And,
agree
and,
with that too. Maybe.
I would certainly agree. I'm just pointing out that,
and
that's
I'm
that's the
also
advantage
looking at a
there.
long-term, I think there have always been, for the past, I don't know how many years, students that elect to become a cyber charter student. And if I would hope that this option would be a better option for them and it would keep that money in the district.
I think the question is partly of those 550 students that were that previously before COVID were going full-time. As things settle down, how many of the 550 are going to remain in virtual?
Yeah.
They decide they
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
don't
That's
want to go
the-
back to
that's the
school.
Well, that's the
conundrum.
$1 million
Because
question.
That's the conundrum.
realistically, theory says all 550 are going to go back to full-time because they had the cyber charter option previously. So, unless they can, in their own mind, decide that our online option is, from a quality standpoint, so
But I'm
good
looking
that
at
it becomes a viable
I don't know.
option.
I mean, I'm thinking long-term, having that ability, and maybe it doesn't require 9 teachers at one point, maybe it's a smaller thing, you could do it with fewer staff members, I don't know, but just having that option for someone who has, let's say, an extended illness, an injury or something, and you have this option that just kind of flows with our curriculum, and it's a,
Really, when we've talked, as Rod mentioned, we've talked about this for a long time, and I think we've all said, well, let's try it and see what happens, kind of thing, and then we don't do it. Well, if there was ever an opportunity to do
yeah, I
this,
think this
Sure.
is the
it's now.
opportunity with the funding that we've received. And then over time, you can eliminate positions through attrition if
Well-
the program didn't succeed.
So what type of teacher would we be hiring? And then if the numbers went down, would they be able to filter into to our?
Well, and we are very expert at moving people and assigning people to different places to find out where they're good and where they contribute, and also where there are needs. So we've done that for many, many years, and the board has been very much a partner in that effort. So, but we also are committed to work through attrition, right? And not by hiring someone in the next year, you have to go. That, we should never do that.
Right.
We just shouldn't. And so over time, we can adjust, not as quickly and not as efficiently if we do third-party vendors.
Do we have the space for potentially 10 more teachers?
Well, yes, we do, because the demand for space would be less, because they're doing virtual, and they could teach in a lab, they could teach in alternate spaces. So very definitely, we would be able to have that.
Dr. Main, if we're going to offer, if we develop your second option, right, and we offer that to other school districts, because we have more space, right, than our kids are utilizing,
Right.
why wouldn't we also offer our in-person option to students of other school districts as tuition?
Yes, and Mr. Azar,
That was a loaded question.
had
I
you
knew
been
that
here
this
a
was
few years
discussed
ago,
before.
you would have a very detailed answer on that. So
I did not, in full disclosure, I know this has been discussed
Right.
before.
It
Right.
never hurts to revisit.
And,
It never
and,
hurts.
and I think it's fair in a new environment and a new day
Yep.
for us to look at that question.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was a good idea to look at the question, and there's a very excellent counter argument to it. But I think one that we won't.
But
take up
probably
tonight.
not while we're trying to minimize, have social distancing and all that. You don't want to bring work people
Yeah,
in.
no, in the buildings right now, we're.
Not right now.
We can't.
Maybe in
And,
a year or
yeah,
two.
and the other issue that I'm working on, I have a really good per pupil presentation to do relative to a lot of other districts, to see where are we in our spending, and also where are we in our staffing with respect to ratios. And I think that will, call it, because our fixed costs are as low as they can possibly be, which is why when we talk about operational revenue, we need some, right? Because we're tight, right? But that's another day. That's another day. Yes.
So I had a question. It sort of relates to people's discussion about tuition students.
Yes.
So how will the special education population be managed in both the Common Academy and Abington Heights version of online education?
Yes. Well, Comet Connect says they take special education students and they say they provide services. We would certainly provide services to the extent we could online, but I will go back to what I said on the first day of the pandemic and have said all the way through, right? There is absolutely no substitute for what we do for our kids when they are under our roof. And so we cannot possibly provide the same services to students who are online, regardless of the platform or setup, that we can when they're under our roof. Right? So to teach a student to stir, right? Or to help a student sound out vowels as we're watching each other's mouths, right? To work on a lab, right? For doing a type of, it can't be done online. And
True,
so,
so I think there has to be thought given to the fact that you may be obligated to at-home services through home health or
Yep.
things like that.
Mhm.
So it's not only professional staff members in terms of teachers, you might be opening, do you know what I mean, a big, you know,
well, that is already open.
thing about,
Right
well, I
now.
meant for any online special
Yeah.
education, you have to, at their home, in their home,
Yes.
manage all of their needs.
Yes, very true, very true. And that could likely be true of a number of places. And we're paying $21,000 per kid in the cyber chart, and they are not taking the highest needs children, right? They're not providing the services that we will provide. So it's a very good point, and one that we're going to see emerging, and that's, you know, the compensatory education discussion that we had. It's a very serious problem. And we won't pretend that we can do everything online that we do in person.
Right, I mean, I personally believe that online education is a way of the future for some students. I think the question for me is, does Abington Heights want to get into the online business of education?
Sure. And we've been thrusted into it right now. And you know, we're unfortunately, circumstances beyond our control keep us in the business. So this is our effort to try to say, how do we do well in the business? Because that's what, you know, that's always our goal.
But I think if we're going to do this, we really need to do it with a purpose, intent, and do it properly with the staffing that's focused entirely on this. Not as a necessarily just part of the in-class. I mean, it really has to be a priority focus of those people.
How do our administrators feel about it? In general, everyone, what's the general consensus as far as recommending which one to take?
Oh, from an education point, I could speak, we do it better than some service. We want to be connected to our kids. And we want all our kids to be back. I mean, that's what we really want. But to the extent that we can be, now, we need, so let me go to the next slide, if I could, that tries to
That's a
answer
great
that, right?
question.
The current model, right, is, you know, we have 550 students. You can do it simultaneously. That's how we're doing it now. But here's the minimal additional costs. But here's what I think, administrator would say. That what we're currently doing places a high demand and strain on our devoted professional staff. There's risk of burnout, and what we're doing and asking of them is unsustainable if we want them to be fulfilled in their careers as educators. So I think it's, and I won't speak for anybody, but what we're doing now is really good as far as the service that providing, but we're asking too much of our teachers. To identify a vendor is a very reasonable solution. Lots of places do it. And believe me, it's more convenient for us as an administrative staff. So if we were self-interested, we would say, so many places are using this. Here's the model, here's the recommendation, here's all the bells and whistles. We'll bring the person in to present, and we're all convinced, go do it. A lot of places do that. We're not there yet at all. I don't think we're going to. And the middle option is the hardest for us, right? It's the most challenging, but given the circumstances of not having all the students back, I think that's where we would want to be because it's best for the kids. But Dr. Vitale, please disagree with every word I said if you.
No, so we're talking to the various companies that we spoke to, I think that
Sorry. In talking to the various companies that we spoke to, I feel that our option is the most effective and the most student-centered, where we have the most contact with our students and they receive the highest amount of services.
So I just want to point out, and I'm undecided on this, believe me, I'm sure a lot of people are. The better we make that middle option, right? The more, to Dr. Cavan's point, is we're getting into the online business. And if we don't get into the online business, you might be more successful at getting the kids back, right? You might get a lot more kids back if we don't get into that business because it is an inferior option. And there's going to be pressure on families to come back to the Abington Heights. So to me, that's the big question is, do you invest the capital now and build this out and have a better option, right? And probably create an environment where more kids are online because it's a better option. Or do you not offer that better option and try to get the kids to not go in that direction that a lot of people think the world is going?
The last time we looked at, had a detailed look, I'm working from memory now, PSSA scores or tests. It was very clear that the cyber charter schools were at the very bottom of the state. I mean, the very bottom. And I think you're always going to have a certain segment of your population that just doesn't want to be in school. And I wonder as a school district, whether we almost have a responsibility of giving those people that want to be online the best possible option we can. Because it bothers me that we pay so much to send our students to cyber charter and the outcome is so poor.
Yep, I would agree with you.
I think that Phil had.
So thank you. So I think, is our mission and vision long-term to supply online education and compete with charter schools? Because if that's the mission and vision we buy into, then I think option 2 is very reasonable, right? But if on the flip side, is this a stopgap COVID thing where, because I think everybody agrees, being in the classroom live with really good teachers, really good infrastructure, technology, safety, all that beats all options, right? So if we think it's a stopgap issue, it's a short-term stopgap, I think it's pretty clear. But if our mission and vision as a board is to supply online, long-term, compete with other online distribution channels of education, then I think it's a different, I think it depends on what our strategy is, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Because that clears like, where do we play? And if once we decide where we play, then how do we win?
Well, that's what we're.
But I don't think we've agreed where we play.
We have agreed, but I do think that that's the exact question.
Yeah.
And, my feeling is that education is changing and the pandemic pushed it further, pushed us there faster than we ever thought it would. And I do think it's a long-term strategy to get back from the cyber. We're paying ridiculous tuition to cyber charter schools. I think we can do it better. I think there's always going to be a demand. And I think as time goes on, I can just foresee a whole different education model than what our traditional 8 to 3 model is right now. And when you have Johnson College, you have other options available to the school or to each student. Maybe they get to go to the Johnson College and do online courses to catch up with, I just see so many more options if we perfect that.
And I'm going to offer just an educator's thought, because I agree with everything that people say about strategy. But as far as mission and vision, our mission and vision is to meet kids where they are.
Right.
And now all the infrastructure around that. And so I would just ask in the conversation, as we look at competing, we look at the core mission is that meeting children where they are in the best way we can to raise them up. And so that's, and we're going to have people in that space.
Yep.
And now if we think that that space is being eliminated, that people are going to be back or whatever, then I would agree. But if we think over time, we're going to have children in that space, we need to be in that space, all in 100%, every child all the time.
But
And
once we
I
make-
just want to
once we
say,
make-
I don't think I was having an auditory hallucination when we had multiple discussions about the need for children to be in-house,
Yes,
about the socialization and all the impact of them being separated from physical separation from their teachers and their peers. So again, I think that, everybody needs to give thought as to whether or not we are creating an opportunity for a better opportunity, like Rod said, for students to choose to not come into school. Because besides meet kids where they are, where do we want to encourage them to be? I've
Agreed.
heard a million times, we want them to be in-house.
right. And 1,000,001, I will say it
Right.
again.
Right.
I agree with everything. We need them to be here. And the question is, if we think they're not going to be here, then how do we address that issue? That's where we're at right now.
And can we provide that additional, so you have, let's say you have that handful of the population that is going to be online, they're either going to be cyber charter somewhere else or Comet Connect. Is it, for the benefit of those students, is it better to also engage them in all the extracurricular activities that would be available to them and at least have, help them socially? Because then they can participate and be more a part of the class than if they were off on a cyber charter school that doesn't have anything to do with Abington. I mean, where would they be better off? Yeah.
Again, I think
Do you have the numbers of students that were going to cyber charter programs before the pandemic? What
We do.
percentage of our students were doing it?
It about doubled. You remember, Jim, the number doubled.
500,000 a year. Yeah.
It went
I
from
think-
500,000 to a million.
Yeah.
So you divide, they're in the low hundreds, I think.
We have this, okay, people have left the school coming in because of the pandemic. This is unusual. Some of those people come in the fall, they're going to be coming back into the classroom, which is great. But before the pandemic, we had people going to cyber charters.
That's what I just-
Right.
Why? That's the key, because if we can get them back into our program and develop it,
Right.
that's going to be beneficial to us. I think it'll be beneficial to the students and to the district. But why did they want to leave and do cyber schooling before, the pandemic? It just
Right.
increased the number that went there.
Right,
So
and I,
that's the thing that we need to.
yeah, and I have a number of thoughts on that, which maybe for another time I could talk about it, but. And I will tell you, before the pandemic, we were far below expected levels of enrollment in cyber charter, but it still hurt us to the tune of $500,000. And hurts us every time someone walks out of our door for any reason. But it burns us when they walk out to not go to Abington Heights High School instead to a cyber charter. It's a very hard thing to understand.
Although
but-
we still have the charter, and that's a separate issue. Your people are still going to opt to go to regular charter, if they
Sure.
brick and mortar charter.
Right, and at least you can understand that, right? But how a student goes to first grade to learn to read through a computer
Right.
is very hard for me to understand.
But this program that you're talking about, we're really not doing anything different in the elementary. Because what we're doing in elementary is working, and assuming all the elementary kids come back, hopefully that would just go, that program would be.
Right, but we don't think they're gonna all come back, right? So we're gonna have dedicated elementary teachers.
We don't think they're going to come back.
No, well, I
Elementary?
hope, well, you could see, there's very, like, if I could just go back. Right, here's 185 students in elementary. I hope they would all come back, but I don't think they're all coming back. I don't, actually. And they might, I don't know, but looking at this number, I don't think they're all coming back. I think we're gonna have a virtual presence in elementary as we have, but then the scale of it, how many, because we need one teacher per grade level. And so we would hope to have one class per grade level, but maybe we need two in one grade level, and maybe we don't have enough in others. So it's not on a per pupil basis per
Right.
cost. There's a certain infrastructure we have to build up. And once we have it, then we can expand. But if we don't have a critical number of students and we're paying a little bit more on a per student basis than we might otherwise, but yet the service is good. That's the problem we face, right?
Is that Abington Heights option going to be coterminous like it is now with a regular school day? Or is it going to be modified and be in between cyber and what in-person is like?
Our initial, well, that Mr. Azar is the synchronous, asynchronous aspect of what we're doing. And we would insist on a synchronous component, a substantial synchronous component, where we want people seen in a class together. So we will largely run during the traditional school day. But as far as being able to post things and access videos later and access resources beyond, that's something we're going to be able to do because we're better at instruction now for all of our kids in school and out of school. We're better instructionally right now than we've ever been. So there will be far more asynchronous opportunities for our kids than ever before. But our vision in this is to have them on the deck with their kids, camera on every day.
Will you have an administrator assigned to the virtual program?
All of them.
For every.
Right, so
level?
every-
It won't be one specific administrator that's in
no.
charge of the whole K through
No,
12?
it'll be, fifth, sixth, all elementary kids will report to their principal at the elementary, at the secondary, at the middle and the high school. So we will not be able to, some places do have that, but our vision is to have it under the auspices of our normal administrative structure.
It's time to have a curriculum director.
Well,
If we were doing all of this curriculum.
there may be, right? There may be, but and we've been talking about the idea of getting some extra curriculum help from the elementary principal
Oh, right.
addition.
Okay, right.
And so particularly when it comes to implementation of programs, yes. But like our administrators are exhausted because they have been so devoted this year, but we're ready, right? We're ready to do this. And we would like to try, and if we find we have more, we'll come to you then. But we want to try where we are and maybe ask if we need it. So,
Is the wit and wisdom curriculum available to elementary kids that are on virtual?
yes,
It is.
yes, it is.
I remember months ago when we talked about this, that wit and
Yeah, it's
didn't work.
not the same, Mr. Fleming. It's like when our kids are like, we were so ready to go, right? And then we go online and it diminished all of our plans for 3 years because we planned on doing it in person. And while there are online components and we've been working at it and our people have been doing a good job, it is not what we aspired it to be when we were going to have all of our kids together doing our Wit and Wisdom Art program. But they haven't. They haven't.
And how are they doing versus the kids that are in-house?
Well, everybody has now, right? So
I'm just curious how they're doing virtually versus the kids that are
What's their
in-house.
progress grades?
Yeah.
Are there big difference between the kids who are virtual versus?
yeah, and we're currently in the process of doing that evaluation of our Wit and Wisdom program. So let's see if we get back to you on some of that data. But I will tell you, the kids who are home all the time are disadvantaged over the kids who are in all the time.
I just don't know if I guess if we wanted to encourage people to come back,
Right.
we'd offer Comet Academy exclusively. They'd come back in droves. Everybody would come back because that's a terrible option, I think. So if we want to get back to the levels we were at before the pandemic, which I think we might be able to do come fall, I'm not sure we would want to offer a hybrid or the middle option.
I have a question about the middle option. Are there test scores factored into all of our stats?
I'm sorry.
Would their test scores be factored into all of Abington Heights statistics? And, they
So when they
take,
take the
they take the
standardized
standardized
test,
test.
are their tests gonna be pulling us down because they're not gonna do as well? Is that
Oh.
what you're
Well, I
saying?
mean, there's
Well-
been a lot of talk about the fact that the online learning is
Right,
not going as well as the
right,
in-person learning.
yes.
But if we're all the same, all for one for all, then I would imagine that SAT scores and the whole deal gets mixed together.
I think what she's saying is when they go to cyber school somewhere else, their scores aren't getting into our
No,
scores.
at a
But
cyber
once they,
charter, no.
once they come to our school, then their scores will.
Correct.
That's what Jean's point is.
That is
right?
correct. That is correct. I'm sorry, I did not.
With the lack of staffing ability now, are you concerned if you do this, that you won't be able to staff the 9 to 10 new professional staff members? Because
Well,
we don't have a huge pool of new teachers?
That is true. And what I'll also tell you is that the vendors are having even more of a problem than we'll have. In a moment of honesty, they'll tell you that their businesses are expanding, obviously, right now, and they're having some very similar trouble. But we're in the midst of our hiring process. How is it going? Are we finding people? Right?
We're just, yeah, with for at the elementary level, we have still open, so we're still. Yeah. That's what very early stage for next year.
So we're right in the midst of that question. All right. So we went to the current model. We looked at this. Okay. But the board also asked, like, what about all this funding you're getting here? Right. I mean, that was the other question that board members asked of us. You know, what is the federal fund, the easers, the federal grants, all this money that's coming along, right? And so to give you a sense of it, right? We've spent about $700,000 on doing all the things we've done to get to today, right? Cleaning supply, the whole thing, right? The exhausting thing that brings us, we spend about $700,000, and we could tell you, like, every single mask and hand wipe, we have it broken down, right? But looking at next year, right, in easers money, we have about $1.4 million to spend in federal money to support our effort. And certainly, I am suggesting that the prior options are supporting virtual, in response to the pandemic, right? We would not be having any of this discussion if we never heard of COVID, right? And that 1.4 million carries through to 22-23, and then it drops off to $800,000 in 23-24. So when we're considering these costs and scalability, right, we also have some revenue, non-recurring revenue, that will support whatever position the board would like to take on this topic. Now, this doesn't cover the options, but it does take a serious chunk out of the demands that it would have on the school district.
You can use it for personnel?
Yes, we can. Now that's just not recurring, right? And so that's where we have to look at the scalability issue. We look at attrition issues. We also, I think, in fairness, in the future, need to look at our staffing ratios, which are pretty high. Like, in other words, we have a lot of kids per student relative to others around us, which means we don't have a lot of slack to be doing things in a pandemic, right? And so, this is certainly relevant to consider when we're trying to come to the best decision possible, right? And again, Common Academy is very scalable. Bing, bing, up, down, whatever it is, based on need. This money, again, is non-recurring, but it supports over time. And who knows what we're dealing with at 23-24, right? It could be worse, could be better, who knows? Yes.
Have we started looking at, costs of, benefit from, like, capital things? Just off the top of my head, ventilation, certain classrooms,
Right.
things like that. I know we have very good ventilation and good filtering systems, but if we look at, maybe there's some better ones out there, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're in good shape with ventilation. In fact, we've had some of our partners in the AHEA join us on building tours. And I would encourage any board member who wants to join. If we go to the middle school and we open the door and we stand in a crack, you can feel the air coming out, right? We go up the top units and we can feel the air that's circulating. We look at the units, and this is because over time, and the board will remember this, we've many times come to you and say, look, we have an HVAC person we want to hire as our own person, not do a third-party vendor. Could you just support us? We've been doing maintenance on our units for years, and it's paying off now. So our ventilation is really good in the buildings. I'm very proud of the work that has been done to have our buildings with good air inside. We have some like roofs do not qualify under this, right? Because it's like ventilation is really a COVID mitigation issue. Roof, it's a harder argument to make, nearly an impossible one, right? So as we look at all of this, right, we think that staffing is the most dangerous one because it's the recurring cost, right? but it's really the one that we're gonna need for the money. And I don't, some places are buying this program and that and spending the money all over the place. And I think if we have to respond to this emergency, we have to respond by looking at the options that we just discussed. And those options cost money. To the extent they cost money, this is where that money would be. And then as time moves on, we have a little time to keep reflecting on what we're going to do and how we adjust moving forward. So this takes a bit of the pressure off of our work. And again, that's just our suggestion as to how to appropriate the money. We could have, series of meetings to kind of explore, but to me, that's the most obvious approach for this money.
So it's increase our staff.
Well, or to if let's say the board decides Common Connect, right, then the first $1.4 million of Common Connect bill would be from these funds.
I think we need to, I don't know exactly which one I think you're recommending the middle one, but I'm not 100% sure, but I think I would want to know, if you felt Common Connect was the way to go for various reasons, then I think, I could be persuaded
Right.
to do that. If you think, so I just kind of want to know, what are you recommending?
Well, what I really tried to do was to be fair in the slides, right? To try to highlight the positives and negatives, to give you a fair assessment of the options that the board has, right? There's no doubt, the idea that if we create something really good, people will go there. We don't want them there anyway. So what's the point, right? That's an oversimplification of the arguments that are being made. But essentially, we don't want to perpetuate something that's not good. On the other side of it, we really have immediate obligations for kids where they are, as they are, right away, right? And sometimes putting a long-term positive outcome at the immediate risk or immediate lack of benefit to a student is a very hard decision for an educator to recommend. So as I look at it, and I wouldn't put these up if I didn't think there was merit to all of them. I think I have to fall in the middle category. And with respect to scalability, you'll see, right? If we had 9 or 10 extra teachers, right, that we would put them to work, and we are down. We have 26 kids in our elementary class size. That's our goal for years. Let's get 26 kids in every class, because that's the most efficient way to do it. And we ask ourselves, is that the best way to do it? And so if we were at a place, some places have their teachers teach 5 classes and they have more planning and more interact. We have them teach at 6 classes at the high school. So we're down to nothing when it comes to flexibility in our staffing. And so I would tell you that in the absence of a pandemic, everything is fine. This district would do well and be way below most other places if it just flat out hired 9 or 10 teachers. And with respect to the cost, you'd still be massively below what other places are spending on a comparative point of view, right? So I do look at the second option and say, for those kids who are in that space, it will help them, and it'll be less opportunity for kids to become totally disadvantaged. But yet I respect any alternate view. If I were sitting and if I had a vote, that's what I would click. But again, I tried to do it in a way that allowed for good discussion.
And is there a motion for this, or are you looking for direction?
Nothing tonight. I mean,
this is something that to think about and vote on another time, or you're just,
we're all planning now, right?
Okay.
And if the board says do Common Connect, we're like, oh, we'll take a vacation day next week, right? So, but we'll make it work great,
right?
But we're assuming we have to do this, right? But the board could very legitimately say, no, we like this option for some very good reasons. And we would like to head in this other direction, and many other districts do as well. So, I'm learning from the conversation here, and we want to reflect what the board would like. So to the extent that you kind of tell us what you want.
So you need like a straw poll?
I just have a
what-
question. I have a question about the 1.4 million that's anticipated revenue for next year. Is it fair to assume that 700,000 of that needs to be taken out for cleaning and supplies and masks and gloves and
No, I don't think so.
what?
Some of it, yes, but we've bought our steamers. We've done all the mitigation, we've done all the stuff. So I think that while our costs in maintenance are marginally higher than they were in the past, I think it's fair to say we're getting, 1.3 million, 1.35, whatever. So a vast majority of that will be used for what we're discussing in the options.
Let's hope we take back some of the cybers that we're paying tuition for.
Yes. And let's hope we don't lose more. I know.
So would this staff be hired with the understanding that they would be the virtual teachers, or would they be hired
Well,
into our pool of our staff and then you would select?
yeah, everybody here is an Abington Heights School District teacher. And then we work with them to try to find the place that's best for them where they are most needed. And this is a really hard effort that the staff is undertaking right now to make this work. Because please don't think we're ready to go tomorrow with this. Right? This is really hard.
Sure.
Well, is
And-
the teacher necessarily 100% virtual, or do they do 2 virtual classes and 3?
And that's what we're trying to
or-
figure out. The
Okay.
most efficient way to do it.
Right.
Right? Because our high school course catalog is just massively,
Right.
like, so fantastic, right? The opportunities that are in that course catalog, right? We will not be able to replicate that every course for every kid who decides to go virtual, right? But if we have a certain singleton, then maybe we offer it twice and once is virtual because the numbers in the school are that. But Mr. Snyder spent all day today doing scheduling and trying to figure out how to make this work with all the uncertainty that we're facing tonight. So there's a huge amount of burden placed on the administrators to make the middle option work. And I will tell you, it may come the fall, we could make mistakes in this. We come back to you and say, this is just not working, and we're going to keep fighting to make it work. But this is a big challenge that we're taking on, and we're happily doing. But it's a hard road, but we think we can.
So
Right.
you're assuming that the students are going to stay that way to the end of the year?
I don't know what the numbers will be, right? But
Well, that's what you're going to be planning.
Well, and we had to say, look, we have to build up a certain critical level of service to make it work. And then if fewer students come in, well, then we're wasting some money. If more students come in, then the per student cost is lower. But it's not as simple as the Comment Academy, where it's $2,800 for every kid that comes in, right? And so that's the challenge.
Dr. Mann, would you envision having hiring an administrator to whose sole responsibility would be the online programs?
Not initially, Mr. Acker, not initially.
I mean, I think if going back to some of the other comments before, if we're really serious about this, I think that's what you have to do.
And it may be, and I appreciate the thought, I truly do. And so if the middle option, we're going to continue to plan as if the middle option is something, we want the middle option to be available for the boards. And until we actually hire the people, it is, it's still an option to go in a different direction. And if we see that we're really having trouble and we're struggling, and we could talk to you about some of the challenges, not tonight, because we have actually a lot more to look at tonight. We can do it, but yeah.
And just one other question, because now that, I think about it, there may be other advantages such as, if we add capacity, obviously there's a cost to that, but if we do add, it does reduce risk of being so lean as we are, right? Because there's no contingency, and we found that out the hard way. I mean, we knew that we were lean, and that maybe not necessarily a good thing. Does it address maybe some risks that are out there with, for example, substitute teachers having trouble getting substitute teachers, long-term substitute teachers?
Yeah.
Is there a way for that capacity to fill some of those risks?
Well, first of all, under the model that we'll come up with, everybody will be working really hard and not have much. But let's say we hire a few more elementary teachers than let's say we overshoot by 2 teachers. It's possible. Numbers don't materialize, right? We can reduce class sizes. And we can find out, here's a class with 26, they're packed to the rafters, COVID is still out there. Let's have a class of 13, which is a huge Or, we have 3 sections of 26 and we knock it off and make it 4 sections and reduce. So there is massive opportunity to absorb staffing in our district. Mr. Snyder has been asking for an English teacher because like we just need electives. Like we just need bodies, right, to fill the schedules of teachers. So
The need will never be
Well,
greater than it's going to be this fall.
the need will
Kids are
never
gonna
be
come
greater
back
than this fall.
Really, with
Yeah.
such a deficit,
Yeah.
such deficits, I think if we were
Yeah.
fortunate enough to have smaller class sizes this fall, it'd be
Yeah.
very beneficial.
And there are some districts, if this board were to be dropped in another district, we'd say, let's have a virtual program, and let's cut a third of the staff. I mean, like, we could do it in different, but that's not here, right? It
Well,
just isn't.
Yeah, but not to go off topic, Phil brought up a great point. I think we have a substitute problem,
Yes,
and we've had the problem before the pandemic.
right.
So I think that's an area where we should look at our substitute model at some time and see if we could, do something to make that better. Support the substitutes, the ones that we do have, and maybe look at, because administrators are subbing in classrooms and it's been a problem for a few years. So I'm not sure if it's the private Kelly temp service that we're using. I'm not sure what the issue is, but we seem to have had a huge substitute, long-term sub issue for
We have.
quite a while.
We sure have.
Just
Yeah.
remember, there's, all the other school districts are having the same substitute problem. It's not just Abington Heights. If you read the newspaper, they're all having trouble getting substitutes.
Not necessarily. I know a few school districts that don't use Kelly Temp, that they have their own substitute list that they do, and they keep retaining those subs because they know the buildings in the district. So, wondering if maybe our model's not working right for us. I'm not sure, but that's something to,
Yeah,
I think,
sure,
look at, because that's
sure.
been an
And if
ongoing
you have the
problem.
names, send me the names.
Dunmore,
Yeah, okay.
Dunmore,
I'll reach out to
Dunmore.
Dunmore, and see how they're doing.
Yep.
I would.
Yes.
Dunmore is a good, I could call them right away.
Yeah.
All right, now we're not finished,
Okay.
okay?
Oh, boy.
We have some harder ones actually now, okay? But no decision is going to be made tonight, just here's the issue, right? So modified quarantine, right? We must focus on the safety of our students, but we also must adapt to new information as it becomes available. And we've been doing that all year. We've been modifying our approach based upon information that we see, right? Quarantine of close contacts removes individuals who could potentially be asymptomatic spreaders of COVID. So that's why we take people out, right? They've been exposed. We don't want them to come down with COVID unknown to anybody and then spread it around and have more people and have internal transmission and big problems, right? So that's why we quarantine, right? But quarantine also has obviously a negative impact on education and activities that are of high value to our students. Now, if it prevents people from spreading disease, well, then that's a cost that has to be paid. But the question is, how valuable is quarantine, right? So the data gathered regarding COVID transmission should not be considered absolute. So I'm going to talk about some of the data that we collect, right? But I'm going to offer this disclaimer, right? That we're not capturing every case, but we have a good sense of what's happening, but our data is not perfect, all right? But we do believe it represents a conscientious and thorough effort by our staff to track COVID in Abington Heights. So for the 2020-21 school year, we began all virtual. We went to hybrid in October. We went full in person in March. We have quarantined 814 students and staff out of 117 positive cases that we have been able to identify. That's a lot. That is an awful lot. Yes, Mr. Ack.
How long is the quarantine?
We started out at 14 days for quarantine. Secretary Levine said that's the most protective approach. We modified that to get down. Currently, we're at 10 days. You need a negative test with the first day being day 0. After 5 days, you get the negative test, the antigen test, and then a couple of days later, you're back, right? I'm going to talk a little later about getting it down to 7, which is the most aggressive, shortest quarantine. But we're at 10 right now. Okay. If we break it out into kind of the 2 parts of the year, prior to March, we had 374 people sent to quarantine, 73 positive cases. As you might expect, when our distances got tighter, when we had all of our students back, the number of quarantines increased over a shorter period of time on 44 positive cases. I will tell you, 15 of those came from a party 2 weekends ago. All right, so the data is skewed a bit there. Right? So we must ask the question, this is a lot of quarantining we're doing, right? So the question is, to what extent has the district's significant effort to identify close contacts and implement quarantine reduced asymptomatic spreaders or transmission in our buildings? That is the question. Are we being effective?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are all of the quarantine students tested?
Not all. At this
Okay,
point,
so-
many are. Most of
Okay.
them are now.
So the
But
numbers are of those who either have symptoms or get tested?
correct.
Okay. but
Well,
it's-
the quarantines, like
no,
early
but like
on,
the
they were just going
positive-
14
The positive
days.
cases are just not, could potentially be missing some positive cases.
Oh,
what
very
I'm
definitely.
implying.
Yeah, and I will certainly acknowledge that. And that's why I said the data. Someone could come in, have a minor scratchy throat, have COVID, unknown to others, and have been in the building. Very definitely the case.
Of the students that we've quarantined that are currently now getting tested,
Yes.
what percent, we have a sense of what the percent that come back positive?
And that's the point I'm going to make here. That's the issue that we're going to face. They're not all, but many now, because once we instituted the 10 days and they get tested after 5 days, the vast majority now are actually being tested because they want to get back. Because after the test, they have to wait the 14 days. And of course, they have to be asymptomatic in all cases to get back in the school. Right. So here's the question that we must ask as we reflect on our practice: is it effective? And so, where have we observed transmission? Right. We observed possible transmission between staff members in early December. We're very concerned about that. There was one instance in one of our buildings where we think transmission could have occurred. We had 2 instances during the course of the year where students who were engaged in non-AH Abington Heights sports activities, multiple cases, we had transmission. We often see people in the same household have transmission, like a brother and a sister, a parent, 2 children. That is something that we see all the time. That's probably the most common transmission that we have, where we have someone on quarantine, their brother was positive, the sister is now positive, having been in quarantine. We do see instances of students staying overnight at other people's homes. Come up with it, no surprise there, I guess, right? We have seen rampant spread among close contacts at a recent student party. Okay, so we know COVID spreads in the community. We have seen it clearly, right? But we have observed little to non-existent spread in school activities, especially during the school day.
What
So
about sports? Have we seen it in any? of
no,
our
very little,
athletics?
very little. We've had some minor concerns. We had 2 individuals on the girls' junior high. Well, forget the team, right? We had 2 individuals on a team come down with it about the same time. So we don't know, so it's hard to actually say. We've had only minor concerns along the way for spread in teams.
I have to comment on the Abington Heights teams. I've been visiting all the athletic events. And I am very proud to see how the district has responded to the safety policy. Yesterday, tennis match, the Abington Heights students were completely masked and the opposing team, they were not. And going to track meets, it's Abington Heights students every step of the way are doing everything to stay. My hat's off to the administration, the coaches, and the athletic director for pushing this. Even the boys volleyball games, at the door, anyone entering has to be checked. It is just a tribute to the safety mechanisms that we're doing to allow our students to be able to compete and participate
Right.
as safely as we can. And I commend the district
you.
for that.
Thank you. And so in looking at this highlighted, of the 800 and some cases on my spreadsheet that I look at, there's one case that I have very big concerns about, right? Where maybe it happened in this school. And it does raise the question when we look at, is it happening? Comparing transmission in schools to zero may not be the proper thing. Compare transmission in schools to the community where we send the kids, I think is a fair estimate. And what I will tell you is we are not seeing in our data that we monitor very carefully transmission in our schools at all. At all.
High level of, quarantine.
Well, and that was the question, right? And so the reason, and that was my original thought, it's low because we're quarantining, right? But of the 800 kids who are quarantining, none of them are coming back testing positive. Right now, putting aside the parties and these other activities, like for instance, at the party, all right, we had 14 kids convert from close contact to positive case, right? And they were quarantined out of the building. Right? But putting that aside, of the hundreds of kids that we quarantine, none of them, in essence, none, maybe one, right? None of them are coming back positive. Right. So that implies to me that if we're staying safe, it's not because we're quarantined. Right. Because otherwise we would see lots of people while in quarantine becoming positive, and therefore we quarantine them properly. But that's not what we're seeing at all. And that's the point of me talking about this issue tonight. And so the spread of COVID through school buildings is low to non-existent. Hundreds of students have been quarantined for no reason. That's a fact. We've quarantined hundreds and hundreds of kids, and there really was no reason behind. I mean, there was a good thought, right? It was a good faith effort, but it had no positive effect, right? In contrast, there's strong evidence that COVID does spread, sometimes rapidly, outside of the school setting. But inside the school setting, we're not seeing it. And it's valuable to us to see, here's kids where it is spreading. So we're picking that up in our data. And here's instances where it's not spreading in our data, which is in our schools. So Abington Heights appears, according to this data, to be quarantining students far in excess of what is necessary. And so I'm going to raise the possibility with our board that a modified quarantine may now be the appropriate approach. And so as far as the CDC, right, what we're doing in this, Mr. Acker, to your question, their data that they present, and the link is down the bottom, for those who quarantine for 14 days, they come back asymptomatic, there's a very, very low, 0.1% chance of post-quarantine transmission risk. 1.1 for 10 days, 5.5 for 7 days. Now, this data is not school setting specific. And we didn't look at it that way when we first started, but now we're starting to say the school setting is different from what we're looking at now. Right? So if we were to move to a modified quarantine, right, the minimum requirements, and we could discuss more rigorous requirements, but at a minimum, students must be free of COVID and free of COVID symptoms, and they must be free of high exposure. That is to say, they should not be in a house where there are siblings. We should not have word that they were at a party where we're seeing rampant spread, right? We're seeing a more traditional, like the vast, vast majority of the people we're quarantining, they sat next to a student who ultimately came down with COVID because their parent had COVID at home. That's the type of situation we're calling. And under a modified quarantine, a student must wear masks at all times and remain at least 6 feet from others while eating. And I think 6 feet, again, is the very, very minimum in this case, right? And so that would be how we would view the modified quarantine. It would get kids back. Yes, Mr. Abbott. I'm sorry.
We require that they take a test in addition.
We could, but by taking the negative test, we might even, like, let's say someone is on a modified quarantine and they're a close contact and they take a test. The test result in 2 or 3 days really may not capture the fact that COVID could emerge over the 14 days. So for us to get the best value out of a test, we would really need to give it after quarantining them for 5 days and letting it run a little bit while longer, which would, I think, to a large degree undermine the greater risk, yes, right? But doing so would undermine the value of having them back.
I'm just looking at your minimum requirements here and wondering whether you should include having a test as well.
Well, we could have them, like, after 5 days, we could ask them to take a test, for sure. And then that would give us, some information. So that could be something that we could add. But I think it would have to be after 5 days, but during those 5 days, they would be in school. Right? Yeah, before they came back. Oh, sure. Well, actually, I'm suggesting they never leave here, right? So after 5 days, we could ask them to have a test. And so as far as, like, where do you get this, right? Where did you come up with this? To be clear, the CDC, this is not CDC guidance or recommendations, right? But as far as resources, Ohio has done some very thoughtful work on this. They looked at the statewide data in the same way we looked at ours. And there's Kentucky has done much the same thing. And there are a number of districts in Pennsylvania, although not many, all right, that are also looking at the potential for doing modified. Some are doing it. I have colleagues that are doing it. But by and large, it's not something that is widely done.
The one study in Ohio, they did regular testing.
Right.
So they were able to remain in school, but they did regular testing. I could not find anything what that regular testing meant. Was it, like you said, after 5 days, test them?
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, I think as I read the article, I understood it to mean that students who were identified as close contacts through the testing process, right, did not turn positive, and therefore having them quarantined would not have added value to the safety of the school, yet it diminished value from an educational point of view from the kids.
Right, but to your point,
Yeah.
if I take it for day one, I may not have symptoms. I take it
Correct.
5 days, so that's what I was wondering.
Right.
They didn't say what that regular testing was.
Right, and we're very strict on testing now because they're out, they have to do 5, they have to show it, all that. But the testing becomes a little more difficult under the modified quarantine approach.
Where are they getting the testing? They have to go somewhere to get it, or the school isn't providing testing? Is that correct?
We have the connection with Rite Aid,
Okay,
where they can just go right down for it.
okay.
And many of them are going to their own medical providers for it. Because the one thing that it's free, no insurance required, go to Rite Aid, you can have it that afternoon. But it does take a little, because it's the antigen test, it just doesn't turn around in an instant. So there's a little bit of time involved. And so here's the thought, right? In light of emerging information from those links, all right, and review of Abington Heights data, a reduction in quarantine period from 10 days to 7 days. So I'm going to say right now, even if we don't do modified quarantine, I'm comfortable going from 10 down to 7, right? All right. But the transmissions, because the transmission risks reported by CDC are not specific to the school setting. And so there's the question I leave with you, right? If we are going to do modified quarantine, we have to alter our health and safety plan, which we worked on. And so is there any willingness or thought that we should move toward modified quarantine instead of where we are right now?
So
Jean, what do you think?
Yeah, Jean, why don't you weigh in?
Now, you confused me with your last statement. So you're saying it's 7 days, but the kids remain in school for those 7 days?
No, I'm saying if, like, put totally aside, and it's confusing because it's kind of a separate issue. Forget modified quarantine for a second. All I'm saying is we have 10 days real quarantine now. I think we can go to 7, all right, without any problem, given the data that the data supports going to 7 instead of 10. So that I think we can just do, because it doesn't, that's kind of something administration can do, but I wanted to say we're doing it. So that I think we're going to do, no problem. They'll still be out, they'll still be quarantined, they'll still need tests. So that's what's going to happen unless the board has a concern, right? And then so that seems to be like what we're going to head to. But the other question, and a much bigger question, is are we going to do modified quarantine where, given the minimum criteria, and we could add some, are we going to say you're a close contact, you sat next to someone with COVID yesterday, you're going to be allowed back into school tomorrow, all right, to continue to be monitored, rather than being home for now 7 days? And so there's our question.
Can I ask you a couple, if you've received the vaccine, both vaccines,
Right.
Can you be exempt from being quarantined at
Yes,
all?
yes.
Now, do you have to show proof of that? How is that gonna
Yes.
be, how's that gonna work?
Yes, if you show proof of having gone past the second dose, a couple weeks after the second dose, if you have proof of that, you're free from any quarantine. And also if you've had a doctor's note that said you've had COVID in the last 90 days, I think it is, then you don't have to be quarantined.
Okay.
So I would just throw out there, to use your words earlier, you said there has been no positive effect of quarantining these 800 kids. And
Little to none.
I think that's obvious. Like I understand why it was done, but like all we've done is hinder their education and hinder their ability to participate in activities. So if there's literally been, and we have our own data, and I know it's not perfect,
Right.
but there's been a lot of those kids tested and nobody's testing positive.
Right.
To me, that says it's not spreading in the school because we're being so careful. And I don't know why we would continue to hinder the kids if the data
Yeah.
is that clear.
And for a while, Mr. Azar, I thought that the reason we didn't have transmission was because we were doing such a good job at quarantining.
Correct. Yeah.
I
Until
really
you had
did.
the data on the
I
actual
thought-
quarantine
I
kids.
thought, oh my
Right?
gosh, right?
Right.
This is why we're being successful.
Mhm.
But then upon reflection, we see that all these kids we're quarantining are not turning positive.
Correct.
Which would be support for the argument that we are helping things out here, right? So while I'm attributing it to quarantining, it may well be the ventilation, it may well be a whole other bunch of things, but it's not what we were doing that was causing the positive lack of transmission in the buildings.
Dr. Mayor, I
Yeah.
would suggest before you say to the student, you can come back tomorrow. And I know that you need like 2 or 3 days to have for a test to be positive. I would still want them to have at least, 2 tests perhaps, but I think, what if they were the ones, what if they were an asymptomatic carrier that gave it to the contact and that person developed it, but they really got it from this person who's asymptomatic. So wouldn't it be better, everybody who was a contact to be tested, just in case one of them was an asymptomatic carrier?
Well,
I mean, like, so for you to come to school next day, all of the close contacts, you get a negative test, and then you start your modified quarantine, and then perhaps 5 days later, you get another one.
well, right, but see, and that will be further, we have to do a lot of testing, but that will be okay. But I think that the sweet spot for testing is 5 days later,
Yeah,
right?
but
And so
what
we
I-
don't really capture, like someone could be in the midst of developing COVID and not have the positive test.
What I'm saying
Yeah.
is, what if I'm asymptomatic and I have COVID, and I
Right.
just gave it to you, and now you test positive?
Right,
Well, I'm gonna test, if you're positive, then I'm gonna be positive, but nobody would know it because they never tested.
right.
So now you're leaving me in school, who happens to be a spreader, and now I'm gonna
Right.
spread it to that. So what I'm saying is, if a person develops COVID and they have 5 close contacts.
Right.
All 5 of those contacts probably should be tested to make sure that it wasn't really them. One of
And-
them being the
Right.
source.
What
Right.
Mrs. Prochowski's trying to do is to trap the carrier
Right.
bef-
I mean, what if-
before, before they put the rest of the classmates
Exactly.
in.
And what I'm saying is, right, is that if I have COVID from my home, right, and I come into school, I don't spread it to.
Yeah, we have
anybody.
114 examples of that, right?
And
Or
so
100
what
and some
I'm saying is,
examples.
it's not so much that, like, if I thought that happened, I would forget it. Like, we're quarantining everybody, right? When my premise is that when I come into COVID, having got it from the community, where clearly our data indicates transmission is occurring, when we come into the school setting, for whatever reason, I used to think it was because we were quarantined, right? But now because of ventilation, masking, staggering of desks, I don't know, right? We're seeing it does not happen in the school. And only because of that am I suggesting that we stop the quarantining, because we are not seeing any transmission whatsoever, although we are seeing hundreds of positive cases in the building, right? That's not going to stop. But what we do not see is, because if there is evidence of what you just said, we should not be doing modifying quarantine at all. Mr. Shaw.
I don't think that's saying that, I don't think we have enough data to say that there is no evidence of what I'm suggesting could happen. I'm not, you know what, though, I don't really know. I mean, Jean, you could possibly answer, how many asymptomatic cases do they actually detect, or is it just a theory?
I'm not an infectious disease or epidemiologist. I just know from my own personal experience and exposure and all the information that we are privy to at work. And I would not support a modified quarantine. I think in this particular, in the student population, they are the asymptomatic carriers. COVID positive cases are increasing in the community, and there's variants, that are out there. And I don't think it's the time. 6 weeks left in school. I would never even personally consider it.
And I like to play devil's advocate here because what you're saying, and it goes to what Mrs. Tierney said, I actually went into one of the practices unannounced. They didn't know I was coming or anything. And they were very strict about distancing and masking and everything. And I think the reason why there's no spread internally is clearly because of the strict guidelines we have in the classroom. As a result, this further supports the fact that quarantine, it's a strategy, right? It's this mitigation strategy, but is it necessary because of all the other things that we're doing? And I think the answer is, based on this data, is no. Now, it may not be a popular, because it's nice to be safer than, but I don't see any evidence of quarantining 800 people. That's what eliminated the spread within the school. I think it's the things that we have in place. And I know because, there's my favorite fifth grader indicates that it is very strict, and so is that intervention of quarantine actually necessary? Is that what we're asking?
That
Yeah.
is my, and
And
I'm
I think-
suggesting a step more, our observation is that it isn't, because we're seeing no spread.
Right.
That's the,
And I agree with that. I do.
To me, this is an easier jump than the very difficult decision we made to put the kids back in school. That was a much bigger jump for me. I mean, this is, and I know Dr. Kevin disagrees. She disagreed very consistently along the way. She has very strong views and I completely respect them, but I thought it was a bigger jump when we decided to put the kids back in school full time. Because I don't think the data was as clear. The data to me, and it's not just our data, like we all read, right? The data out there is clear that in the school settings, that's not the CDC, the CDC guidance is not for
But I
school
don't-
settings or
I don't
medical
think
settings.
Testing would be a bad idea.
Yeah.
No, I don't disagree with that.
I have to agree. I mean, I think the data certainly has a point and it's compelling, but I just don't. I just think if we went ahead and tested the close contacts, it's just one more opportunity for us to make sure we're not putting our kids at risk. As a parent of some other student, I wouldn't want to know my student is in close contact with someone that even may have had COVID. And I think as a parent, I would feel a lot better if those kids at least had a test, even though, Dr. Mann, you're right, they're not within the 5 days.
So when the student is quarantined, are they virtual? Are they allowed to go into the virtual class?
students who are quarantined are allowed to be virtual. At elementary, it's a little bit difficult because people are on different, in high school and middle school, it's much easier than elementary, but yes, they're allowed to be virtual.
But to be clear on that point, we have quarantined many elementary school kids for 2 weeks. Right?
Yeah,
The
we
most,
have,
the
right.
kids that are hurt the most by not being in school.
Are the
And we'll
elementary-
continue to do that
Right.
if we don't do
Yeah.
modified quarantine.
Yeah. That's right. And
But they are,
it's
you
hardest.
said it's difficult for the elementary student to be virtual.
It's
but
most
they are
difficult.
They're-
virtual,
Well,
but they are.
No, they're not. No, they're
Well,
not.
Elementary is harder because like at the high school, you're in the same class. You happen to take it from home, right? But at elementary, there are 2 different classes. They're not at the same time. We're discouraging them from jumping into a class. So it's been a real hard challenge for our elementary people. Most of all, it's a little more seamless at the high school, but our not that we would make a decision on safety because of AP testing or end of the year activities or any of that stuff, but all of that is very much at risk right now because of our quarantining. And I have come to the view, my own personal opinion, that the quarantining has not been helping us and it's been hurting us. So, and that's the only reason I bring it, with great respect for altering opinions, including the CDC. right? Let's be honest. I'm not disputing that the CDC is not suggesting this.
But
Right.
did you ever get a feel for the majority changing from 10 to 7 days out?
Well, we haven't done that yet.
But I just meant, I mean, there's people talking about modified quarantine.
Right.
But we kind of quickly left the conversation about changing from 10 to 7 days out.
Well, and I'm happy to, that's why I raised it tonight, and I'm happy to devote whatever time is necessary to
Why
that
don't we do
discussion.
that first? Why don't we try that first for a bit?
That would be fine, of course.
Or even 5 rather than 7, and you get a test.
Well,
5 days.
7 is the, like, the
I don't,
way they have it all organized, as far as the testing schedules are concerned.
Oh, okay.
Like it comes around at a certain time, and like they kind of have it, like they have a
So
chart, the
it's
CDC.
0 or 7? No, I
No,
forget
no.
the CDC because you've
Right.
already forgotten about.
No, we are, no, not at all, not at all. This is the CDC right now. We are at the moderate level of the CDC, right? So the first question, is anybody concerned if we go from the moderate level to the CDC to the more aggressive level, where I'm suggesting these percentages, while valid for the larger community, are not school specific, and I think are way higher. I know way higher than what we're observing.
All right, but
So-
I'm saying you went from 10 to 7 to 0.
Well, I didn't go, I'm not going, I'm saying, I think I'm okay going to 7 in the strategic plan that you put together. But I don't want to do that if there are concerns.
Wait, I
Okay.
thought you want to go modified,
I do,
and
I
that's
do.
0.
that's 0.
Okay, so I'm saying you went from 10 to 7 and saying, but actually we could do 0.
Well, here's what I'm saying, I want to go to 0,
Yes,
so that's my first suggestion.
right.
If I can't go to 0, I'd like to go to 7.
But can't you go somewhere in between? That's the question. Like it,
No, I don't think 4 is I think 7 is well defined by the CDC.
yeah, but I'm saying that that's irrelevant at this point because 0 is not defined by the CDC. So now we can just pick a number. Well, I know, so why?
Well, no,
I mean,
okay, no, because they really thought this out. The CDC really thought this out about 7 days. You have to test after 5, and they have. Go ahead.
Based on, I mean, when you're exposed, how long it takes.
Yes.
right, so,
Symptomatic, and then how long it takes to go back to the
Right,
hospital.
right.
right.
So I think,
But but there has to be a declining probability the further out you go from your contact. So I'm saying if you have if after 5 days you have negative tests, the probability is probably that you don't have it or aren't going to develop. The probably smaller chances of developing it beyond.
and you can see it declining right here.
Right.
But what they're saying is that you don't really gain as much. You lose
It's
a lot
not
of the
linear.
value. Those 2 days. you
Yeah, but
lose the
my
value.
value is getting the kids in school for more days. That's the value.
That's about right. Yeah. But I don't think we like the.
Dr. Mann, when you were going through this, it seemed to me that what you were saying is you were going to go to 7 days and then you wanted to see what the board thought about going to 0 days.
Well, right. I think it's not hard for us to agree on 7 days.
Right.
And so I think we'd be okay doing that. I don't even know that the board objected, we wouldn't do it, obviously,
Right.
but I don't even think we needed the board.
Right.
If we go to 0.
So the
which I
question then
think-
is 7 or 0.
correct.
Yes, that's the question. You hit it exactly, Mr. Adams. 7 or 0.
So in addition to missing school, these kids are also being restricted from doing any extracurricular activities also, correct? So there's a lot of kids, that are in sports in particular, but all extracurriculars, that they have their opportunity this spring to not just participate in sports, but for some of them to get into college. And I've had phone calls from multiple parents who have kids that are in 10th and 11th grade that are missing out on a couple of weeks, 10 days maybe. And in addition to the education, I mean, I just don't know why we would specifically hinder their education. But in addition to that, there's real damage being done. And I just don't see any positive benefit. So I'm obviously pretty clear on where I would. vote.
Well, I would think that maybe for the high school, it's a little bit, I think the elementary kids are the bigger problem, not the kids who are participating in sports. I think the kids are participating in sports are still going to, they're the same classroom, they're just doing it from home. I realize it's not as good as being in school. But as far as academically, they're not, I'm more concerned about the elementary kids who don't seem to have that same option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being quarantined. So I agree that there's a big concern with education, particularly at the elementary level. And I just wanted to, I would like to see a negative test. That's all I'm saying before I would make that leap. I would like to see that they're negative before I send them. You know, I think that taking the extra precautions is probably good enough if they, as long as they have no symptoms. But I think a negative test would.
We could, I mean,
That's my thing. I think I would. wanna
we
see
could
negative.
ask them for a negative, test, take a test at 5 days. And then,
Why not just have them tested when you identify them as close
Right.
contact?
Why not that?
Unless they had, but it could help if like they were in contact with somebody and they got it from, who said that before?
Exactly.
Somebody said that if the person that actually came down with COVID got it from one of those close contacts
Yes.
a few days ago, you might catch a kid. So like
That's
I,
That's
Right.
what
Right?
we're saying.
Yeah,
is
you were
catch-
saying that,
Catch
right.
that kid,
Right.
catch the carrier.
right.
Well, but we don't think. I'm just saying, why wouldn't?
right, and see, here's the thing, like with the party, right? We had the party, right, and then it was like 4 or 5 days later, all these cases are coming in, right? So if we were launching tests shortly after the start of the party, I think it's very likely we would not be seeing the actual outcomes. And so what I'm saying is also, I think our problem, and that's the last thing we'll talk about tonight. I said on the 27th, actually, I think that's a little too close to the 12th at the end of the year because of that little lag that takes place between your interaction and if you actually get it to when you actually are testing positive. And so that's the problem.
So if we were going to require a test, you think it's more effective to wait the 5 days than
It
to?
is. From everything I've read, if you're not doing it at 5 days, you're not really capturing what you're hoping to get. I don't know that, just that's kind of what I read from.
I mean, I think it would be good to have a test after 5 days, because that's when you're going to maybe catch people, because then we're also going to continue to collect data on kids that are quarantined. And if the data changes,
Right.
then we can do
And
something about it.
Now, I think it would be more valuable or potentially valuable. One of the things that is suggested is, every day they come in, they have to take a temperature. A person on modified quarantine has to do a temperature check every day. And certainly they have to fill out the screener every day, right? So if you're on quarantine, you screen, you must be asymptomatic, you must verify you're asymptomatic. These are like, when I said minimum, these are other things that we kind of think we might do. To say, check on it, go into one of our walk-up things, check your temperature, make sure you do a screener every day. If you're in this category, is that perfect? No.
Would they have the option to say, I would just as soon be virtual for those?
Oh, sure.
7
Oh,
days
definitely.
Instead of going through the.
Yep.
We're only talking about the first contact.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
Nothing changes for someone who's positive.
Right.
That definitely will not happen.
So where are we now? You're saying after 5 days, you have to have a test, and that will bring us to the 7 days because the test results
Well,
will be back.
Right now you test at 5 and you can get out at 7 if you have a negative test.
But you want to go to 0.
But I want them right back in there, provided that, now, if we had a party or God forbid, there was I read that one of the state playoff teams ran a student bus. And on the way back, they're all celebrating. They won the state championship and everybody on the bus caught COVID, right? So, context matters here. And so if we found people who were in that high risk type of activity, we would say, you're just quarantined, all right? But in the school setting, which is what I'm talking about, that's where we think we're in good shape from what we've seen. So,
let's suppose a student tests positive
right,
and they have 4 or 5 close contacts.
correct.
That they also spend a lot of time after school with at each other's house and hanging out and not just in school, but so now these kids have had contact with each other in
Right.
a non-school setting close. You're gonna let them come back and do this?
Well, I think that, here we go, free of high exposure. And we look at each case,
Okay,
right? And so certainly in the same household siblings,
okay,
right? If they're at a spreading event,
okay.
right?
All right.
Then we would certainly look at that. If they were on a bus coming home from a state playoff
All right.
and everybody was sick, right? So
Okay.
we would
As long as that
we
will
would kind of
get
sort that out.
considered.
Yeah, we would
Okay.
sort that out.
All right.
But even still, so let me play devil's advocate. Even still, if they did come into school with the areas and with all the constraints in place, there's still no spread in the school.
Correct.
That is the logical conclusion, right? And I'm still just throwing in there because of the recent experience we had, that added level of caution if you're in a high, because I think it's very unlikely you're going to be turned positive if you were quarantined because you're sitting next to a kid. It's highly likely you're going to turn positive. And so if we still think getting positive kids out is positive is a good thing. So that's why I put that in there. But you're to be strict to the logic I'm selling here. You're right.
But to your point, Mr. Robeson, that could be the next step, right? I mean, if this works as well as the data looks, if kids really aren't spreading it.
Positive contact that had it was in an area, whether they went out to dinner together, they should be.
Right now,
quarantined.
absolutely agree.
That
I
makes
feel that way too.
absolute
I would want that kid quarantined right now too. I'm just saying that in 3 months or 6 months,
Well, yeah, hopefully.
that could change. But I wouldn't do
hopefully
that
they'll
today.
be vaccinated.
Do you have any data, like or a number? So say students positive. On the average, how many, based on how many classes they have, how many close contacts? Do you have a number like, so I'm
Yeah.
positive, how many people just in the school have I been around?
Right.
Have to go in quarantine because of one positive?
And you took the bus.
This is probably the best thing I
And you
can
took the
see.
bus to school.
When we were 6 feet, right now, this is adults too, right now, adults have gone off the screen right now because they're all vaccinated, nearly all of them, right? But roughly to get to your point, and it varies. Some kids have a lot,
Right.
others have
Maybe
smaller
around
sports, right? But of 73 positive cases, when we were 6 feet apart, we ended up with 347 quarantines, right? Now, again, these numbers are skewed here because of the party, but at 44 positive cases, where we've quarantined 477, but the numbers are up because of the close proximity of our students, which we anticipate.
Mhm.
Now, I said, no one should be expected to make this decision tonight. This is a big one. So think about it, and maybe at our work session the next time, if there's support for the idea, we can go ahead. And if there's not support, well, then we'll just keep going where we're going. We're going to do it at 7. How's that?
Okay.
All right. And then almost done. Almost done. There's a lot. We did the prom, we did a survey, right? And of we only had 100 students respond. We asked them about the options of having it at the school or at an off-site venue, right? About 47 kids, you figure with 100 responses, it's about a percent means about how many kids, right? So 47, 48 kids said they'll go to either one, right? I plan to attend if option 1 is selected. Option 1 is the one that's in the school. People don't want it at the school, right? So, 5%, only 5% more would come if it was at the school. About 15, 16 more kids would come if we had it off-site, right? So we're looking at very low attendance at the prom as far as interest. And we very much promoted the survey. Like, this wasn't something we just threw out for a minute.
Are you using that date of that Thursday?
27, the
Okay,
27th.
and you're mindful that that is the day before states for track.
Right.
And field.
Right.
And it's the day before baseball districts. So it's not a,
Yep. And a lot of places are having it on the day of, right? Most places are having it on the Friday. A lot of people are having problems on Fridays. So I mean, that is true every year. We always have a problem with people having to decide the day before. And so Montel Country Club appears to be the best choice regarding venue in both cost, right? And in the, it's a nice place, right? There's not a high degree of student engagement to assist in planning at the prom. We still think those other proms are going on, and a lot of people are engaged in planning other things. And there's not a lot of help at the high school among students to get it done. Numbers will be low at the prom. We continue, and perhaps even more so than ever, continue to have concerns about dancing at the prom. This could delay the delayed onset of COVID could impact graduation, right? But to be fair, low numbers of students who attend might have a really good time. So I bring nothing easy to you tonight as far as what to do. If we proceed with the prom, it will really fall on the lap of Mr. Snyder and Mrs. Tioni to plan it, because again, the students, they'll volunteer, but in large part, usually it's something that the committee would do, kids would be involved and engaged, but we don't see that happening with small numbers this year. If the board would like us to proceed, we certainly could with it, but again, we look for your guidance and direction of this. Yes.
What happened at the prom? The kids we're talking about at our last meeting? They were talking about they had the venue, they were going to go ahead and do it.
I think they're moving ahead with their plans.
So irrespective if we do this, they're going to do what they're doing.
That is
anyway.
correct. That is correct. That is my understanding. I think there's actually now 2 proms going on.
So that would be 3 total if we did
Well,
that.
well, one that would be official. And I think there are 2 unofficial gatherings or proms or something that are being planned.
So go ahead and say, okay, you're going to do the prom at Mondale. At one point, if the attendance is really, really low, they kind of pull the plug. Only 30 students are going to go. Do you still conduct it?
Yeah, and part of that would be Montiel, how few they're willing to entertain. I think we could do it at 60. But there does come a point where we have to, again, at 60, we ask the question, you know, is it something we should do? And at 30, the question becomes a more intense one.
Mr. Snyder, do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, when we met with the students, excuse me, after your last work session regarding the prom, you know, a number of the students did raise concerns about the date. They raised, you know, the dancing, for lack of a better term, administrative control that would be at this function, whereas, and they came out and said that they are continuing with their plans for their events. You know, which when we sent the survey out, I think prompted some of the numbers that we received.
So you're not getting the impression that people will attend both events. They're going to go to their event. They're not going to go to the school event.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, the survey results were what they were. I kept it open for a week, that survey. I sent it through the school email. I sent reminds out through the school, both through the personal remind and also on the community portal to try to remind the kids to log on and to take the survey. You know, and as it was continuing, you see the green where there are students who are not interested, and by lack of participation in the survey, I would say that there are more students not interested in the senior class than are interested, because our initial prom information survey that went out had about 160 responses, 165 responses. So, you know, there were a number of students who responded initially whether they would like a prom and what they would want it to look like. And when we actually had a date and we were just looking for a venue, less and less of the students participated in the survey.
So what would be the risk of booking the venue and then having to cancel due to lack of, like, is there a deposit you lose if you book Montiel, or are they flexible?
Well, they're giving us a price per person. I don't know if there's a minimum cost.
Right.
They've been very gracious in working with us. And I don't have an exact answer of an exact amount of the deposit or what they would be looking for. That's information that I can get tomorrow and put the scenario out there with total numbers of people and what we're looking for. Their venue holds 400. I don't know if they look us to put us in a smaller space with less than 100 people.
Right.
Which again raises concerns with the dinner alone and keeping people appropriately separated while they're eating the dinners. If we're in the big room and we can afford to have that, I think we can have enough space while students will have their masks off eating dinner. And there's enough space that.
But
if there's a
students
level
are
of-
eating in the cafeteria, right? Without their, or not? Are they
They're all
not?
6 feet apart. You have to think we'd be putting people at a banquet table. They're going to be inside of 6 feet. Unless, even if we're putting a couple at an individual table for 2, they're not going to put them at a 6-foot table. There'll be smaller tables to accommodate and keep those far enough apart. So I mean, there's a level of risk no matter how you slice it. And then, with the dancing, I think the fewer people that are there, the less to worry about it. If you've ever been to one of our school dances, as many people as you can pack into a small area is as many people that will be there. So we have, in our high school dances, we have the entire gym floor, and they are all compacted inside from the 3-point line to the 3-point line and inside of the boundaries of the basketball court. That's where all the kids are. There are some kids dancing on the peripheries, but the majority of the people dancing are all crammed in, and that's where they want to be and how they want the dancing to be. So it isn't, if you would envision dancing at a wedding, it is dancing in the smallest space possible that will house the number of students that we have.
So the 47 students that responded that they will go either way, I'm sorry, Michelle, that they responded that go either way, they really want to go to a prom.
It looks that way, yeah. And, if we have one, if Montiel will allow us to have for those 47 students, I think they could have a nice night.
It's been a while since I've been to a prom, but how, if you don't dance at a prom, what do you do?
I don't know if we should discuss
It's
that.
really been a long
I don't think we
time
should
since we've been
discuss
to a
that publicly.
Bocce ball, Mr. Fleming, bocce ball. Bocce ball was our plan.
So, Mr. Schneider, it's your environment, the high school. What would be
Starting to
your
sweat.
recommendation? What were you looking to see happen for the senior prom?
Well, and I spoke to Dr. Mann, even before the last meeting, and I just didn't think that with trying to keep appropriate distancing between the kids, that we could safely pull off a prom that the kids want, because they want a 2018 prom. And I would love nothing more than to be able to give them a 2018 prom. But with everything we're talking about, from quarantining and COVID and tracing and all of those things, the prom they want is not what I feel that I can give them. So whatever I give them, I feel in their minds is going to be less than.
Are the 2 proms that are already scheduled considered private events, or was it open invitation for all seniors?
We had nothing to do with it. So it's very much a private event. I suspect that all are welcome, but that's beyond our, I don't know that it was limited, Mr. Stein. We don't have much information on that.
If the decision was, the prom is just not going to happen this year, would you still be open to doing your plan on the field with the party, just an open party for the, like, not the prom, not just an open?
Can I use the mic so I can make sure?
Oh, sure.
Pick it up?
Yes.
Come on up.
and I don't know if people could hear some of my responses that are watching, so I do apologize for that. But I just want to make sure that everyone can hear this part, because the question about if there is still some on-field type of party get together, the current plan that we have in place, barring bad things happening between now and then, is that the Monday before graduation is going to be planned as a senior recognition day, where we're going to have events outside on the turf and the field where where the senior class can be together, socially distanced, having a good time. We're looking at planning events, having a lunch, doing the senior superlatives, and having a lot of the fun things that we do for a senior recognition day in a normal year. Doing it socially distanced, taking a panoramic photo of some sort, really having a nice day for those students on the Monday before graduation. Then on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we would hold our graduation practices for the seniors, again, on the turf field, where they would go through, they would get their caps and gowns. We're also planning a National Honor Society event during that week, where the senior members of the National Honor Society who lost their induction ceremony would get their honor cords for graduation in a more formal manner than we've ever done it before. And then on the day of graduation, we would have the senior award ceremony outside at the high school, back on the field, using the bleachers in the field for that awards ceremony. And then the seniors would then go and have graduation, hopefully that evening, weather permitting. But we are looking at an outside ceremony either way, so there would be rain dates to the graduation ceremony. So that last week, that week in June, while students in 9th through 11th grade will be finishing their education in class, the senior class will have the opportunity to have that week to be with one another in a more relaxed environment and really enjoy their last week at the school.
That's great.
So I think that though, for many of the kids, probably the 47 that responded, they would go either way. Girls probably bought their dresses, they dream about their senior prom, they just want to go somewhere, get dressed up, wear their dress, and so I feel like it is a challenge. It doesn't sound like it's going to would work out the way we would want it to, but if you don't book the venue, it definitely won't happen. If you book the venue, knowing that there's an out in the event that it just fizzles, you just don't know if it's going to pick up steam. You don't know if it's going to fizzle. You don't know if COVID is going to just shut it down no matter what. But at least if we would secure the venue and set the date and just, give it a shot, that's where I would be.
And we can definitely do that tomorrow.
I don't know if the rest of the board feels like that, at this point, it's
Even if you have to put a
I
deposit down.
support Mr. Schneider's recommendation of his week.
Oh, yeah, I
And
think the
listen,
week is
and-
great.
But just listening to the administration at the high school tell us how difficult it would be and concerned they are with the fact that we're already quarantining because of party activity. So I want to support Mr. Schneider's recommendation. That's where I stand.
Did he make a recommendation?
So, but you're already gonna have other outside groups.
Well, that we can't control
No, but
that.
it's gonna factor into what the atmosphere is.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
in
Yes,
high school
yeah,
anyway, and
right,
may additionally put other people at risk,
right,
more so at risk.
What,
right.
The other,
oh,
the
of
other,
course, yeah, they will.
And are
for
they,
sure.
what are the dates? Are they
That's
soon?
Towards the 14th, mid-May, right?
Oh. That's just.
I don't know. What does everybody else think?
Right, so it's about 60, I think.
If you schedule it, what's the risk? We have to cancel, you lose your deposit. It can't be that much. So I'd go for it.
And we have a DJ there. There are other
Yeah.
things.
as long as all the students know that going in, because as you said, like, there's costs also associated dresses, tuxedo rentals, and if they're gonna have to cancel, there has to be a date. by
Well,
which-
yeah, you can't just do it. I mean, I don't know, sometimes kids don't respond to surveys. Maybe if they saw it actually was, they'd be more interested, or maybe it'll just totally fizzle. I think you're gonna know
Well,
that.
and this could be canceled on the 26th. Well, I mean, let's be clear. This could be canceled the day before. That has to be,
Right,
and particularly with all the
yeah.
other things that are happening. Right? Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
It could be really bad. I know. I don't know. I don't know. I just feel.
Oh, we all feel bad. I feel terrible.
Yeah.
I agree with Greg, though. I think that you should at least try and see what the numbers are. I think you should be honest with the kids about dancing and that it's not going to be a normal 2018 prom, because maybe that'll
Well,
affect the numbers,
Well,
but
we also have to find out if Montage is going to reimburse, or Montdale is
Montdale.
going to reimburse.
Mhm.
And what the
Yeah.
loss will be if we do cancel. We have to
Yeah.
get that all out before.
Right. And while we can keep social distancing in algebra class, we can make no such commitments to a prom. I mean, it's very hard to ask administrators to jump into I mean, kids are going to dance closely. This will be a high risk of, it's going to be a high risk event. And we don't want to put administrators in the position of saying, well, I'm pulling the plug and turn on the lights and go home. Right? Because that's what we're being asked to put our administrators in that position. To say either, kids are going to dance, and I don't blame the kids for an instant, right? They want to dance, and they want to dance in the way that inspires them, right? They don't want to be waltzing. And if we are at that, we will be engaging in a high-risk activity, and administration will not be in a good position to mitigate that risk when it comes to dancing.
well, I mean, if administration doesn't think that they can prevent the high risk dancing, then I
don't know how. I really don't know how to say. I mean,
Yeah.
we could say, don't, dance in quads or dance 3 people up with it, and that diminishes a lot of what's happening. I mean, if we tell kids, look, you have to dance, like we thought we would dance outside in pods of 20 with some degree of separation over a giant field. That was our plan, right? But that got nowhere. And so when we have it indoors and it is dancing, we have to go in eyes wide open as to what will be happening in that.
Except that a big chunk said they would go either way, whether you had it at the school or not. So maybe you do go back to your school.
Well, but in talking to the board at the time, the board was not in support of that option.
At the time, I was under the impression or at the hopes that we would be able to consolidate the proms and that we wouldn't have these other proms happening at May 14th when it's going to be very risky. It was my hope that we were going to be able to squelch that, consolidate and mitigate that risk.
Right.
But now we're not mitigating that risk. That's still happening. So that's unfortunate.
What I wanted to say is I was at the meeting at the high school with
Right.
the students, and Mr. Snyder made it very clear to the students. There was a lengthy discussion about dancing. So I think they understand, at least I heard it, I'm sure they heard it as well, that it may, would not look like a typical prom.
Right.
So this survey was after that too. So I think the students that were there hopefully passed it along to the other students, but he was very clear in
Right.
communicating what that would look like.
I think we try it. I mean, I'm going to say we'll try it, and with great reservation, right? With great reservation, we try it. And again, if we may have to cap it at numbers, right? If it gets more than 60 or whatever, we'll do our best. But understand this is off the rails as far as some of the things that we
Dr.
normally do.
Rainier, you felt more comfortable having it on the turf, is that correct?
Oh,
doing that
absolutely. Yes,
And
100%.
most of the people who responded said they would go to either one. Is that the solution? You plan the one on the turf, then that's much easier to cancel in the event that it has to be canceled. I don't know. Oh,
Yeah.
but they responded that they would go either way. Maybe they were flip. Pardon me?
Yeah, of those people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they wear flip-flops. With their gowns, I don't know. I don't know. I'm at a loss, whatever, I guess whatever administration recommends.
All right.
Does anybody have any opinions or everybody's just no opinion?
All right, well, then, let us come up with something then, right?
Let us come up with something.
Well, I
Like,
mean,
whatever.
the board decided to be engaged in this, which is good,
Right.
but we need direction from the board if you want to.
I gave my direction.
You said what-
I
you're
recommend,
good.
my
Yeah.
recommendation is to
Right.
support Mr. Schneider and his decisions on what he thinks is best for the student population at the high school that he's the administrator of. It's disappointing, we all are sad, but the reality of it is, look where we are, we're quarantining students because of the gathering, so it's unfortunate, it's so unfortunate. I'd love to see the kids have a great prom, like they did in 2018 and 19, but
Yeah.
I like his idea of the full week of outside activities for the senior class and adding some specialty things that no other senior class got to do for the full week. Those are great. I know it's not a substitute for that senior prom, but it's unfortunate that we are where we are.
Did you say that at Montdale that it's entirely indoors?
No, they have outdoor, like a gazebo, I think they have out the back.
But there's no outdoor tent, with the dance floor that exists be indoors? Like, I thought that when we talked about this last, that we were deciding perhaps it was going to be in a tent at the country club outside mostly, or outside
Yeah,
at
and
Montdale.
I think at the level of participation, we're talking about having tents and rentals makes things very, very costly.
The
You know, so-
gazebo at Montel would easily accommodate that many people under.
Under normal.
under-
Oh, it's like a
normal
pavilion?
conditions.
Yeah, I mean, if you had 40, yeah, if you only have a handful of kids, they would be.
Right, and so they have a big room, but the problem is
Right.
how people dance at proms, so, having it outdoors at a tent, like the tents were costly and would make good sense if we had larger numbers. But far less so because of the smaller numbers that we have. Like even a DJ on a per ticket basis is going to have a contribution to cost here. So,
I think that if the school has a prom, you're gonna have a lot more than 47 or something. I think we're looking at the number of people that responded, but I don't know about the rest of you when you were 18, but if there was a party to be had, we'd be there. So I think if we do it, we should anticipate bigger numbers than just 40 or 70 or so.
I think administration feels it's not a manageable event. Is that safe? Is that a fair statement? Or not fair?
we could do an outdoor event that when we first spoke of this was thought to be not appropriate. Right, and people did not like the idea of everything that we came up with. And so we went down the road of saying, well, what do people want to do? Because that was the least liked option, so much so it was, I think, largely rejected as a good option. And then now we have an option that is similar to what the kids want. There is a high degree of risk to it. And administration is prepared nevertheless to move ahead if that is the direction the board would like us to go. With reservations.
I know for me personally, the idea of not talking about the prom was upsetting in a sense because there were so many extracurricular and sport activities happening. But I still, and I know there was conversation about what could it look like? How could we still mitigate? How could we make it happen? Outdoor venues, that type of thing. But I would not be in favor of foregoing appropriate mitigation measures just to say we had a prom. So if, in my opinion, if administration is not comfortable or feels as though that that's an unfair ask, then I don't think there can be a prom.
I would agree with that.
So, I mean, we have to, I think, move on this tomorrow, right? Because, with timeline. So let's see, let me sit with Mr. Snyder and we'll see what is practical. And if we can put something together, we will. And if we really can't, we won't. Right? And it may be indoors, it may be outdoors, it may be a whole number of things. We'll try to reflect what the students want to do as best we can, because we want seniors to have, the best we possibly can. But we are not far removed from a near catastrophic event that, we don't want to be the ones to repeat. So, and we'll get back to you later in the week about what we think we should do.
Okay,
All right?
fair enough. Yep.
And Mrs. Brashalski, at long last, that we did have, in fairness, we had a lot of important things to talk
We
about.
did.
So
We
that
did.
said, if there's any other discussion or thoughts, stop sharing. And
Okay, can we have a motion to approve the agenda
So, second,
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker,
yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mrs. Brashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
Motion to approve the minutes
So moved. Second,
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
yes.
Mrs. Brashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And do we have any board reports?
Yes, I do. The AEIO had their meeting. First, I'd like to ask the district if they can revisit the website and put the AEIO's link back on the website.
I don't even know what you're about. What do we-
Well, when we redid the website?
Okay.
The AEIO link was removed.
So that we can get it back up there.
Please,
For
thank
sure,
you.
yeah, yeah.
They actually asked me to read a little kind of a campaign statement that they want to get going for this next month. As you recall, last month I had mentioned that the state approved an AP initiative project that I shared with the district. And the AEIO would be initiating an ambitious campaign next month to highlight the fact that we have the incredible opportunity to assist the students who participate in AP courses and have possibly received college credit for the institutions that they will be attending. Our 14 members of our board will be reaching out to our current contributors to see if they would be willing to support this project, as well as new businesses and community foundations. If there is anyone at home listening to this that would like to make a contribution or a donation to the Abington Heights AP initiative or any other wonderful programs that the AEIO does support for the district, please contact the AEO and the website, which we thought was on,
We'll get
at
it
the
right on.
aeio.org. So, thank you.
Right, you send me the link or I'll get it right on.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have our student representatives tonight?
I'm looking, I don't see Sydney. So maybe perhaps not, probably studying.
Probably. So somehow we had our superintendent's report pushed up right after the roll call on the agenda.
Yeah.
And then we have it.
Well, you don't need to hear from me twice.
So we're-
That was once
I
is
think
more than
we're
enough.
going to pass on that. Okay, at this time, we would have our public participation. If there's anyone from the public who would like to address the board, please raise your hand. Just state your name and where you're from, and please remember that you'll have 3 minutes. Is there anybody in the audience that wants to address the board? No. How about online?
I'm not seeing. I'm seeing no hands.
Okay, we can move on to our action discussion items. I have a motion to approve the bills.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
One question. One for communication systems integration.
Is that this? Is that this?
Communication systems
integrators, CSI. We're still wrapping up our warlock roll down there. We're withholding portions of money.
Yeah, it's just that all it's repair and maintenance.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned this a few times. If they could just beef up the descriptions a little bit more, it would make it easier to, when you're reviewing, if they could put that in the memo, you know, when they're entering. Yep. No. Okay. Okay. Roll call?
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
I have, Mr. Medensky, may we have the treasurer's report?
Yes, you may. We started the cash balance in March at $24,900,435. We had total revenues of $2,174,870. Net disbursements were $6,981,173. And we have a cash balance moving forward in April of $20,981,173.
Thank you. We get a motion to approve
So moved.
Second.
on the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And Dr. May we have the personnel report?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Pashowski. Under C, request the board to approve the resignations listed, letters A through D, noting we're going to be losing some great educators in that list.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And under resignations, request the board to approve those individuals listed in letters A through C.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
Perhaps we could take leave of absences together. Number 3 and 4, request the board to approve those individuals listed under letters A through E in number 3 and letters A through C on number 4.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And we request the board to approve the EDR positions appointments as listed in letters A through C.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
I have a question. Has the unified track, have they been able to have any competitions?
I'm not sure if they've yet had them.
Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And we would consider a motion to approve the software club student activity account as contained in item number 1.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And we request the board to approve the opening of bids for art supplies, athletic supplies, maintenance, janitorial supplies, and refuse collection.
So moved.
Second. On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And under letter F, request the board to approve the Abington Heights School District 2021 extended school year staff list as contained in item number 2.
So move.
Second.
On the question?
I had a question. Is this include any students who were solicited for need as a result of, the COVID year and lost
I think,
education? Because it seemed like a small list to me.
yeah, these are all the students in our traditional ESY, special education students who would typically, and perhaps this list has expanded because of the circumstances this year, for those who would have a particular problem with loss over the summer under normal conditions. And certainly that list is, number of students has expanded given our circumstances this last year.
Would have anticipated the list to be much larger. I thought all students were offered an opportunity for summer school or.
This is a separate, this is
Oh,
this is a
okay, because I
separate
was gonna say
program.
it's kind
Right.
of small in comparison to what I
Correct. We will be
anticipated.
offering, yeah, no, exactly, Mrs. Cavan, that we'll be having additional, this is our typical ESY program that we always run. We'll be expanding that, I know, at the high school as well as in other places, for sure. Good question.
Roll call?
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries
I
9-0.
request the board to approve the volunteer list as contained in item number 3.
So move.
Second. On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Medensky.
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And we request the board to approve the following middle school teachers to teach in the after-school tutoring program.
So move.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
And we request the board to approve the settlement agreement between Abington Heights School District and student 7X as contained in number 4.
So move.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Pusateri.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
I just wanted to give an example of why I'm voting no on this. I looked at the billings and I'm not even questioning the rate, but some of the hours toward how much it takes to create a document, which is a form document, is outrageous. So I'm voting no.
Mrs.
You're
T-
referring to the legal bills, not our fees. So
No, the
Just to
legal
be
bills that
clear.
were submitted, yeah,
Right,
thank
just-
you, thank you.
right.
Just to be clear, the legal bills submitted by this particular attorney is absurd.
great.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-1.
And we request the board to approve the tuition reimbursement report as contained in number 5.
So move.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mrs. Pusateri,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0.
Okay, and the.
Rest is
the
informational.
rest is
I
informational.
want to thank the board for working out some very hard issues. So thank you.
Mr. Wachowski, just one thing, just if at all possible, some constituents mentioned to me that they had a hard time finding the minutes and agendas, and they clicked on agenda and they didn't have access and some links to the meetings. I don't know what the policy is of how long we retain them on the site, but maybe we can mention that on the site, just how long we keep them and when they get posted, because I know things are in draft and it may not be appropriate, especially if agendas are being generated. But just to set expectations of when the public can actually see these things and for how long.
I think that they're on there for quite a long time.
The minutes, I think, are almost, like, they go back many years.
Many years, yeah.
Right, but as far as when they post, I believe they have to get approved before
Well,
they are.
As soon as, like, for instance, as soon as we go back, having approved minutes tonight, we will post them in very short order.
So specifically, there was a question about the agenda for this meeting. It was out there, but the person clicked on it, didn't have access to it. It was maybe protected, maybe.
Probably because it wasn't approved yet.
No.
The
no,
agenda.
What I think happens, and I don't know, but we occasionally have issues where we post it on our server and it's open to the public, but some companies have protocol in their computers that do not allow them to access the agenda. And it will appear that the agenda on our end is not available, but the actual problem resides with and I don't know that this is the case in this
Right.
instance,
The sonic
but
wall.
we run into problems with people often accessing from their work email the stuff that we have on our website, and that sometimes it hits a problem.
And then in terms of the YouTube tapings,
Yes.
are they out there for a certain amount of time and then?
The YouTube, that was asked of me, and so the YouTubes from January going forward are all up. You could access them. Before January, there were some instances where I inadvertently had a tab or something open that mentioned a teacher's name or had some type of information on it. And unknowingly, and it was called to my attention. Since that point, I've been much more careful going forward. And so they're all there, but the ones that from prior to that point, I took them down for fear of some of the issues that arose. But that was my fault. But going forward, you can go back to, I think, January and still find, like, you'll be able to watch this over and over again, Mr. Olson, from your home on YouTube, tonight's meeting. Yeah. But the absence of the early ones, that was my issue.
Any new business? Old business?
Old business. I know everyone's tired and you want to head out. Back in 2017, we approved for our boys and girls lacrosse programs to be a club sport. Now, I don't know if any of you've noticed, but both teams are doing incredibly well. They have huge numbers of student participation. And by being a club, the district doesn't hire a coach, a leader. And I think it's time for us to visit that and put the lacrosse program under the Abington Heights name, so we can hire a leader, so the district has that coach intact, and that the district can help the kids to get traveling and get to the meets. I mean, there are a ton of both boys and girls out, and the coaches they're volunteers. So I think it's time for us to at least look at whether or not we want to put them into the Abington Heights athletic sports.
I would support that.
Yeah, I would also add, there's a very new and robust youth lacrosse program in the Abingtons that only started 2 years ago, and there are dozens and dozens of kids participating at that level also. So I would definitely support that.
Do we have any other club sports?
Yes, junior high baseball, junior high boys baseball.
Winter track.
Winter track.
Winter track is volunteer. So yeah.
Okay. So people want to entertain a conversation at some time. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So, yep.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night, let
Thank
me end the
you.
meeting.